Tuesday, May 20.
Sorry. You're good to go.
Yeah, but I got this. Okay. Something popped up when that thing popped up. Anyway, good evening. This is the Tuesday, May 25th, 2021 regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission of New Canaan, Connecticut. Lynn, let's start with you telling everyone how you're going to run the meeting tonight, please.
Okay. We're on Zoom webinar tonight again, which means that all you can see on the screen are the Planning and Zoning Commission members and anyone who is speaking on an application. They'll be elevated. Everyone else is in attendee mode, so you can see the names on the screen, but that's all. You can't see their little pictures. If you want to speak at a public hearing, you'll need to identify by raising your hand. It's when you right click on your name, you can click on the more button and there's an option to raise your hand, and we'll call on you at that point. And the commissioners are all unmuted, but if someone pushes the raise your hand button, you could sort of jump in, but be cognizant that people are trying to speak also and waiting in line.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lynn. And as always, commissioners in public, when you do speak, please state your name. Let's start with the roll call. John Goodwin, I am here. John Chris.
Present.
Krista Nielsen.
Here.
Dan Radman.
Here.
Claire Tiscornia.
Here.
Kent Turner.
Here.
Dick Ward.
Here.
Bill Williams.
Here.
Arthur Cassavant.
Here.
Chris Herring.
Here.
James Bash.
Here.
Okay, great. So we have full regular member attendance, so we will not have anyone seated this evening. I'd like to start off by noting that 711 Silver Mine Road will not be heard tonight. We do expect to hear it at our next meeting, our next regular meeting, which is June 29th, 2021. And I'll also note at our next meeting, June 29, 2021, as I'm sure all the commissioners know, planning and zoning related legislation was passed in Hartford about a week ago. And we will we'll kick off the meeting on the 29th with Francis Pickering, who's in Westcog, and he was sort of the lead person from a Westcog perspective on the legislation. So he'll talk to us about his views of the legislation, some of the impacts of the legislation. Let's get going with the public hearing then. Item number 1, 50 Adams Lane, upon application, Robert Pryor, Land Tech authorized agent for Alexander Tudor owners for special permit approval, section 34C7, to allow the construction of an accessory building that exceeds building coverage of 1,000 square feet. The proposed barn gym is 1,260 square feet in the 2-acre zone at 58 Adams Lane. Who is here to present?
Mr. Chairman, it's Rob Pryor with for the applicant.
Go ahead, sir.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Mr. Chairman, I was going to recuse myself from this.
Okay, great. Okay, Mrs. Tiscornia, you are recused, and seated for the duration of this application is Mr. Bash. Go ahead, sir. Thank you, Claire.
So I'm not sure, this is the first time I've presented in a Zoom meeting for New Canaan. I'm not sure how I sent a rendered site plan up, and I would just like the commission members to be able to see that.
Yeah, the planner can help you on that.
Thank you.
I'm going to bring it up right now. You can start talking.
So the property is located at 50 Adams Lane. It is an interior lot containing 2.00 acres. It is presently developed with a existing residence, pool, patio, driveway, septic system, and developed lawn and landscape areas. The applicants are looking to construct an accessory building, which will be a sort of a workout room, as well as a shed for some of their maintenance equipment. The building exceeds the allowed 1,000 square feet. And so we are here in order to obtain a special permit for the construction of the proposed accessory building. The the proposal meets all requirements with regard to setbacks, building coverage. The proposed plan has been reviewed by the New Canaan Health Department and approved. And it also has been reviewed by the engineering department with regard to drainage. And is also, it's my understanding that they have also signed off on it. I believe the project architect is also here. If you have any specific questions about the building, but I'm certainly available to answer any questions regarding the site plan.
Mr.
Okay.
Park, text
Sorry.
name if I can find him in the attendees. Actually, could he?
Should be Lisa Mockler Taylor. And then I think the property owners, the tutors are also should be on the call as well.
Okay. Hold on 1 second.
Okay, maybe while Lynn looks, Mr. Pryor, it sounds like you're completed, you're done with your presentation, or?
Yes, there's not a whole lot to this for me, so.
Okay. Questions for the applicant?
Kent Turner, I have a question about the neighbors. Have there been any letters for or against the application?
No, we haven't received any.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
This is John Kriz. I have a question. Could the applicant discuss some of the construction materials used on the exterior of this anticipated building?
Yeah, I'm hoping that the, Lynn, have you been able to see, can you see if the architect's on? She was supposed to be on.
She should be, she is, and she should be, she should be able to speak right now.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Lisa Moakler Taylor.
We can hear you.
Hi there, I'm Lisa Moakler from Moakler Taylor Architects. So what we're proposing for the outside materials are natural cedar for siding, vertical cedar siding, and a dark gray metal roof.
That'd be a standing seam roof type of metal roof?
It is, it's a standing seam roof, yep. And they're black windows as well. The existing house on the property has black windows, so we're trying to match those.
The foundation, any of the foundation will be visible?
No, well, just at the very base, just 8 inches from grade.
Okay, and that will they be clad in stone, or is that going to be exposed concrete, or?
That'll be parge coat concrete, yeah.
And the standing seam roof, is that going to be painted? I've seen some standing seam roofs that are red, green, other colors. What are you anticipating here?
No, we're proposing a dark charcoal gray.
Okay. Will there be, what sort of plumbing will be inside the building?
There will be, we have on our plan an area for a future bathroom. The owners are probably not going to do that bathroom just yet, but in the future, it would be a bathroom.
When you say bathroom, is that like a shower and toilet and basin, or toilet and basin?
Shower, toilet, and basin.
Are you anticipating any kitchen facilities in the building?
No,
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, Lynn, why don't we open it up to the public, please?
If anyone wants to speak from the public, could they just raise their hand so I can find them? Mr. Karp, do you want to speak on this application?
Can't speak back.
What? Oh, yeah, okay,
Can't speak unless we ask him to.
we can find out.
Nope, he took his hand down.
Oh, perfect. So we'll send you back.
Let me know when you're satisfied, Lynn.
Does anyone want to speak from the public on this application? And there is nobody, Mr. Chairman, who wants to speak on this application.
Okay, great. Thank you. This application's closed.
Yeah.
Okay, items 3, 4, and 5, New Canaan Library. These will be heard together. As I noted earlier, item number 2 will not be heard tonight, will be heard on June 29th. So item number 3, discussion consideration request of Ed Rhoda Hanlon, Robinson and Cole, authorized agent for the New Canaan Library owners, along with its affiliates of properties located at 151 Main Street, 64 Maple, 44, 48, 56 South Avenue, amend the zoning regulations dated June 16, 2007, revised August 16, 2019 to add section 5.10 quasi-public library overlay zone and proposed amendments to section 2.2 of the New Canaan zoning regulations. Item number 4, upon application, Edward O'Hanlon, Robinson and Cole, authorized agent of the New Canaan Library owners, along with its affiliates for properties located at 151 Main Street, 64 Maple Street, and 44, 48, 56 South Avenue for site plan approval pursuant to section 82A and a new section 510G7 of the proposed quasi-public library overlay zone and a special permit pursuant to 82B, 44D3, 54C4, 64G, 66D, and proposed sections 510C, D, 510G3B, 510G7, and 8 of the proposed quasi-public overlay zone regulations. Item number 5, discussion and consideration of the request of Edward Hanlon, Robinson and Cole, authorized agent for the New Canaan Library Inc., owners along with its affiliates of properties located at 151 Main Street, 64 Maple, 44, 48, 56 South for petition for change in zoning boundary for properties currently in the business A and apartment zone. So this is the 5th hearing we're having on the library. We intend to close the public hearing this evening. Before we get going, I have a couple of comments. I think that, or I know that there have been a lot of concerns raised among the community as to, why is this being dragged out? The cost of delays. Why is the commission doing all these hearings? Why is the commission hiring a consultant? And for those of you who are perhaps less familiar with the planning and zoning process, the answer is this is nothing new. This is what we do with a large, significant application. And you can argue that this is clearly, probably the one thing we'll agree on in this application. It's one of the most important applications we've had. So we have to respect the process. Planning and Zoning Commission is chartered by the state of Connecticut, and we have a job to do. And we have to go through the entire evaluation process. That includes listening to the public and thoroughly vetting what the public has to say. It also means respecting our decision criteria. And if you read our decision criteria, it's fairly extensive, and that requires a lot of work as well. And typically it does require the usage of consultants and site visits and other things that we've had to do in this process. Some of the good news for those who are concerned about the length of this process is 2 of the 5 meetings that we've had were special meetings, i.e. they were done off cycle in the process. Second is I will be proposing to the commissioners this evening and proposing to the applicant, I assume the applicant would like to do it, is we close the hearing tonight, we will have a special meeting specifically to deliberate over this matter. In addition to that, I'll also note that a big positive has been a fair amount of savings have already been accrued to the original cost of the project. Specifically, the elimination of underground parking has probably saved a net over $3 million of cost to the project. We've also avoided the cost and time of employing a parking consultant. As many of you know, last June, I suggested to the first selectman, and he agreed, as well as the chairman of the town council, that at that point in time, we bring in our own parking consultant. So we've been working away on this on the town side for almost a year with the parking consultant, with Mr. Mann, with the town planner. So we've had multiple town resources working on this continually. And quite frankly, if we did not engage the parking consultant back when we did, I asked myself if we would have been ready to even close the hearing tonight. There was also by the applicant originally wanted to have a May special meeting, and my view was, frankly, we were not there. We were going to talk about the efforts of Selectman Corbett to put together a working group. We also still had additional work to be done on traffic and safety as well as drainage. So even if we had had a special meeting a few weeks ago, I would not have been able to close it back then. Tonight, here's what I want to do. First thing I'll urge everybody is both commissioners as well as those who will be talking, those who will be presenting those. Let's try to keep things as tight as possible. That said, commissioners, you know, this is not your first rodeo. You know how this process works, but let's do make sure that you are satisfied that you've asked all the questions and explored anything you may be thinking about as you have to grapple with making a decision. The flow that I intend to pursue tonight is we'll open as always with the applicant and see what the applicant has to say. Selectman Corbett will then speak and talk about the outcome. You all have a memo from the working group, but she'll talk about what the working group focused on and where they came out. We'll then hear from the consultant that the commission hired, Mr. Crosskeys, where we wanted to better understand the cost situation, but also understand if there were other alternatives to somehow bridge the gap of the parties. After that, I will ask Attorney Sullivan if she has anything to add on behalf of the New Canaan Preservation Alliance. We will then go to Mr. Galante, who will talk about parking, safety and circulation. I'm not sure we need this, but if any commissioners want to hear, I understand Maria Coplet in engineering for the town. She will be available as well if anybody has any questions about the engineering memo that we had from her department. And then we'll finish it up with the applicant having the close. So I'll open it up to Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Smith, Robinson & Cole, representing the New Canaan Library. And with me tonight, as always, is Lisa Oldham from the library, Mark Herter, Paul Stone, Chris Cardney, Daniel Robinson. I believe Kathy Gagnon may also be on. And we're all available to answer questions. And in keeping with your admonition to try to keep this moving along and efficient, I'm going to open by simply summarizing very briefly what we have done since April 27th and to bring it to tonight before you. As you are aware, we have, one of the primary functions we worked on was working on the parking and the traffic issues, and we received a approval from the police commission on May 19th for the crosswalk and other improvements subject to your approval, but they did approve it with that proviso, and we have submitted that set of plans that incorporate those additional changes that were made that the police commission approved is now before you. And Chris Cardney is available to answer any questions you may have about any of the details of that plan. We also, as you had mentioned, we received the memorandum from Maria Coplet on the drainage and infiltration systems, and Langen Engineering did respond to her comments with their responses. We had a very good meeting today with Maria Coplet to go over a number of the issues there. And again, Chris Cardney is available to answer any questions you may have about any of the specifics of that. Also, as the commission is aware, you received a letter from Attorney Sullivan writing on behalf of the New Canaan Preservation Alliance suggesting a proposed condition of approval. And I submitted a letter on Friday with our comments and objection to that condition, but proposing one of our own, which is that as we had previously stated, if the Preservation Alliance or any other responsible party wishes to remove and relocate the 1913 building, the 1936 building off-site, that we would accept that as a condition of approval under the terms that I have attached, and so that we can meet our own timing requirements. So we opened it up from beyond just the New Canaan Preservation Alliance to anybody who is a responsible party who can meet those conditions. And we also reviewed the Cross Key report, and Paul Stone has submitted some comments to that report that you have available to you. But I think in the spirit of having this go forward, rather than us talking about this now, you have Mr. Krosky, you have others available, and Kathleen Corbett available. I think that would be best if they speak and get all the information before you so that we can respond at the end when it would probably be the most efficient way to handle it, unless someone has a question right now. And of course, we stand ready to answer those questions.
Does anybody have any questions for the applicant right now? Okay, looks like we're good. Okay, Lynn, if you can, well, I see Selectman Corbett. Selectman Corbett, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, Selectman Corbett, by the way, before I forget, I want to thank you. My line with you is you jump in where angels fear to tread. Making this effort, I think, was just huge. And on behalf of myself and the commission, I thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and commissioners, and good evening. As most of you know, I'm Kathleen Corbett. I am a member of the Board of Selectmen, but also I have served as a facilitator of the working group that was inspired, in fact, by this commission, by the public comment that was essentially about seeking help to find a solution from those involved with the library plan. So I'm good. Let me be the first to say that we don't have a solution. That said, after 2 in-person meetings with representatives from the library, 4 members, including members of the board, the executive director, the owner's rep, preservation supporters, including members of the board of the New Canaan Preservation Alliance, advisors to the board, and Keith Simpson, a landscape architect, and members of the town council and the Board of Finance, 2 of whom were actually members of the library building committee. So with that, all of these people together, so 11 plus me as the facilitator, while we don't have a solution before you this evening, we did accomplish clarity where there might have been uncertainty, openness where there were barriers, and respect where there was acrimony. And so the memo is before you. I just will summarize very quickly sort of the 5 key elements of the work that was done by the working group. And first, by starting to say that with almost universal praise for the new library building, support for the new library, and eagerness to see that come to fruition. We're also pleased that the library, in fact, did open up the 1913 library in 1936 edition for inspection by the New Canaan Preservation Alliance to their satisfaction. In fact, they reported back to the group that the 1913 library was in excellent condition, and that represents 3,600 square feet. And as I said, includes both the 1913 and the addition of the 1936 edition. We also put before the 11 members of this working group choices, if you will. And no surprise, first choice was what everybody has already stood for. There were 5 individuals who recommended preservation in situ of the 1913 library to be preserved and gone through a preservation process in situ, in place. The second was demolition and to move forward with the town green, and 3 members of the 11 had that as their first choice. And then finally, 3 other members of the same group recommended moving the 1913 library off of the campus. So those were the first 3 choices. To be fair, nobody, no group, no individual really had a plan B. That said, and they certainly weren't representing the bodies necessarily that they have come from. They're really only representing themselves. But having said that, second choice, there were a couple of recommendations to consider, if at all possible, moving the library either in full or partially on campus. Very little support of moving it off campus. We did not discuss any potential location. Those who support preservation do not support any move at all. In fact, that actually goes against what they feel very strongly about in terms of preservation, and they could not attest to any opportunity to support financially or with their resources any effort to move the 1913 building. So details are in the memo. I'm happy to address them. The last two items, one being cost estimates. There was a review of the cost estimates of actually the three before us, that provided by the NCPA, that provided by Dharma, and the other by Turner. There were no changes to those cost estimates. They were, the group agreed to wait for the results of the consultant who was retained by the commission, but our report was actually written before the consultant's report came out. So we're really waiting for that. There was agreement, however, that the range of a cost of moving from 800,000 to 1.2 million was probably within range. I did note that the consultant's report came in slightly lower than the lower area of the range. And finally, if I can just say that boards, commissions, and indeed the broader community really benefit from really two things, and that is the diversity of everybody on boards and commissions and in our community, and diversity of thought and respect for that thought and the process that is underway now with the Planning and Zoning Commission. So on behalf of the working group, and you have everyone's names, we do respect the process, and we stand ready to provide any further information. If you want clarity on anything, we're happy to convene again. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mrs. Corbett. Commissioners, any questions for Mrs. Corbett? Looks like we are good. Thank you again, Mrs. Corbett.
Thank you.
So did somebody?
Yeah.
Mr. Bash, I'm sorry.
That's okay. James Bash. Hi, Selectman Corbett. How are you?
Hi there.
So I read your report, and I thought, okay, maybe there's reason to be a little bit optimistic that there's possibly some area of daylight here to move to a little bit of a middle ground, maybe not a firm resolution, but at least working towards that. And so it was a little bit surprised to read the letter from the Library Board of Trustees. I'm just going to quote from the letter. It says, and it's referring to the library project overall. If this well-vetted design and 75% contribution of private funding for this new library in Green are not what the elected and appointed leaders of New Canaan want after years of discussion, it is time to return donor money pledged to this plan and for a new group to step forward to deliver what our town leaders might approve. Did you get the impression during the working group meeting that that was the posture of the library's posture?
Well, I would say that it's clearly a concern of theirs, and that is reflected in our collaborative working group memo. So it is a serious concern. It's both on the time that is taken to raise the, I believe, 16 million now, and the concern that if there was an opportunity or choice to preserve the 1913 library in situ in place, or even move it onto the existing campus, that there's going to have to be conversations that take place with those donors who've already committed for this particular project. So that was definitely articulated during the working group meeting.
Okay. And then just a follow-up question. When we're talking about accommodations from a diversity of viewpoints, as you mentioned, as an ideal to be working towards, I'm thinking about the potential accommodations from the two parties that we're talking about. And one accommodation is if we didn't have underground parking as contemplated in the project originally, and instead, I think the town is stepping up and committing to 76 parking spaces of the Center Street parking lot. Was that seen by the representatives from the library as an accommodation, and perhaps as an accommodation in their favor? I think what was included in section 1.8 of the MOU, which was since removed, was the idea that the 1913 library, the NCPA, would have to present a viable financial and use plan and would have 2 years to do so, along with the presumption that the library would not pick up, or taxpayers would pick up, any of the incremental costs of the rehabilitation of the 1913 library or the ongoing costs. So I'm curious more from your perspective, what do you feel like are the appropriate accommodations from both sides? And were those accommodations recognized by both parties? And your thoughts on that?
Sure. First, I'll say we did not speak with any depth on the parking issue, but we did speak about the use of the 1913 library, again, in situ, and how the Preservation Alliance, if that opportunity was provided, that they would gladly step in. They would conduct all of the preservation if the library, and this is clear in the memo as well, if the library found no use for the 1913 building, that the Preservation Alliance would, there are a number of organizations, nonprofit organizations, who've already expressed interest in being tenants of the 1913 library. But first and foremost, we recognize, the full group recognizes that this building and the property is owned by the library, full stop. And that the New Canaan Preservation Alliance would step in, would help preserve the building through tax credits, through grants, and through fundraising to protect the 1913 building. And then essentially provide that back to the library for their use, should they have specific use for it, and they may, or if not, there are options in terms of providing the 1913 building for use by local not-for-profit organizations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else for this, Mr. Chris?
Yes, ma'am. I read the report you were kind enough to provide to the commission, and my conclusion is that no one could agree on anything when you boil it all down, particularly with three options: either tear the building down, move the building, or fix the building and leave it where it is. You know, the three options, I remember my grad work in poli-sci, you end up with, sort of get technical, Arrow's impossibility theorem, that you end up with unstable voting with three options. It's very difficult to agree on things and rank ordering. And my deep concern is that the sides are really pretty firm on what they want, and would end up with, you know, I mentioned, I think at the last commission meeting, it was, we're being asked to divide the baby. I don't even think it's that. It's really, I don't want this to turn into some type of steel cage match, because no one wins in those.
Right.
And, you know, the best you can hope for is you're one of the walking wounded, and that's not a New Canaan type of solution either. I think the library's statement, which Mr. Bash mentioned, that, you know, we tried to come up with something for years with lots of consultation, and if we still get a no, at some point you say, you know, okay, we tried, we failed, let someone else do it. And so the default option is we end up with the same, no disrespect to the library, dilapidated building we have now that's not particularly functional, and nobody's winning on that one. So it seems that with your group, with the public also sharing lots of thoughts with us, we've been inundated with letters from people, all of which I have read, and I'm sure the other commissioners have read. And there is a significant division of views on this. that it's going to end up in a situation where we're going to have to make the call and someone's going to end up being darn unhappy. And I certainly don't like those types of outcomes, but I'm wrestling on how to find one that doesn't end up with an outcome like that.
Right.
So this is what I got from yours, is that even your group couldn't come to a conclusion. So we're sort of bit back to where we started from.
Well, if I may, Mr.
Otherwise,
if I may, thank you very much, Mr. Chris. I really appreciate it. Just a couple of comments. The benefit of coming together in person after more than a year where people didn't even have a chance to see each other smile or shake hands did mean a heck of a lot in terms of having people meeting for the very first time. In fact, members of the board of the library didn't know personally, had never met people on the board of the New Canaan Preservation Alliance. These are two very good bodies that represent our community. So having an in-person meeting actually did help in terms of the dialogue, did help in terms of clarity. I would just clarify one comment that you made in terms of quote, dilapidated building. The 1913 building, as part of the review from the library was kind enough to offer to the NCPA as part of this working group, is not dilapidated. In fact, it's in excellent condition. And I think that's also been confirmed by the consultant. So yes, the other parts of the building, I absolutely agree, but we're just focusing on the 1913, right? And so that was, and the other thing in terms of clarity of regarding size, there was some confusion about that in terms of what's the 3,600 square foot building. And when you're absolutely right in terms of the survey, ideally, Mr. Chris, I wasn't looking necessarily for what the first choice was of the 11 members, because I could have told you that. It was pretty predictable. I was also looking for the second choice. And that's where, you know, some good information, again, they're not representing the bodies that they have, but they're giving us some sort of sense of what might be doable. I would say that the Preservation Alliance was clear that preservation is preservation in situ. And while there were these other choices of moving it, it's not something that they could support. The library, we only had 3 votes on demolition. There were 4 representatives there. So there is, I would say, as Mr. Bash said, some glimmer of potential consideration of alternatives. And those are, you know, something that would be taken forward perhaps, you know, at a later date. But right now, as I said, no solution was I could bring to you, but I think there's a lot of clarity in terms of addressing, if you will, the moving parts and some of the basics. And I get a lot of respect for the divergence of opinion.
Mrs. Corbett, this is Dan Radman. I have a question.
Yes.
In reading through the report that was put together as a result of these meetings, it seems like while options were discussed between the parties, and it was great that everyone could get together and talk about the various possibilities, it seemed to lead the witness in terms of the options presented, the first choice and the second choice. It was either really demolition or move the building, right? Preservation was talked about in situ preservation, not incorporating into the building. So as part of this open forum discussion with all the parties involved, was the subject even broached about a possible partial redesign of the building to incorporate this, what we know now is a good shape 1913 library building that could possibly be integrated into the overall library plan?
So thank you, Mr. Radman. That's a great question. And it was discussed. There was several options. Again, this is more of a straw poll. It wasn't a professionally done survey. It was done by me. So it was really meant to get a sense and a feel, and really to generate discussion on what those options might be. So what wasn't voted on for first choice was a move of the building or partial building to an undefined site on the campus. And so those, if you will, were options that would be considered 4 and 5, if you will, in full and partial. Those didn't come up. Those didn't reveal themselves until the second option was selected. And again, that was considered. We did not get into any detail about whether it be incorporated into the new library, although I would think not, because the idea was to let the library as currently designed by the architects, engineers, et cetera, to go ahead to do that. It was really about the library, 1913 library, where it sits now. And again, that's where the highest vote total came out in terms of the first choice. The second choice would be either moving the full building or a partial move someplace on campus, and we did not get into specific identification of where that might be. But not incorporated in the new building.
So, I'm sorry, what was your last sentence?
But not, we did not discuss incorporation into the new structure.
Why not?
It was just, we wanted to move to see whether or not there was any interest in actually moving the building somewhere. I think if you had to incorporate, this is my interpretation of things, moving the building to incorporate it into the new structure would require a whole redesign and again, bring up all the same issues that the library has in terms of concerns regarding certainly the design, the structure, the time, the donors, et cetera. So if there was an option to move it, it would just to make use of the open space that is currently on the campus. There was no consideration made in terms of changing what is already building that I shared with you, that there was near universal support of that structure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you again, Mrs. Corbett. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Let's have Mr. Crosskeys. Lynn, if you can bring him on, and Mr. Crosskeys, if you can give us a short background on yourself, your firm, describe your mandate and some of your findings, and do not have to be extensive. We'll supplement it with questions from the commissioners.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Great. Good evening, everybody. I'm Bill Kroski, founder of Kroski Architects. We're located in Hartford, Connecticut. I've been in business for 37 years. About 50% of our work is renovation and 50% new construction. Much of our renovation work is historic preservation, various types of buildings and various types of use, from small buildings like the Mark Twain House and the Harriet Beecher Stowe Museum to large former industrial complex conversions using historic tax credits. So I'm happy to be here tonight and be called in to act as a consultant to answer questions and provide information for this for the New Canaan Library. My charge was, as consultant, was to be a resource for the commission to answer questions about cost and preservation issues. I will just briefly go over the report that I provided. I had Dave Goslin, who's an architect and principal of the firm that's been with me for over 30 years, go to the site on the 14th and do a tour of the building. He found it to be in very good to excellent condition. And he looked at the 1930 and the 1913 portion of the building. But everything looks in really good shape, and both structurally and in terms of the materials and the exterior envelope. So I was given a number of questions to opine on, and provide some information on. And that's the basis of my report. I reviewed the materials that the library has provided as part of their application, including the cost estimates, and then also the materials provided by New Canaan Preservation Alliance in their presentation and in their cost estimates, to familiarize myself with them. And I think that just in general, the library's estimate is, as it probably should be, has a lot of cushion in it to make sure that from the fundraising side, enough money is put together to cover what will be the eventual construction costs. And on the preservation side, I think they're looking at a more limited immediate scope. So that's part of the disparity you see in their two estimates. I found both of them to be a little bit generalized, and when I went in to provide my cost estimate, I approached it a little bit differently and presented it a little bit differently. And I'll get to that in just a minute. In terms of the question of hazardous material, I think that for the most part, abatement and handling of hazardous materials will be the same whether you preserve and renovate the historic building or you demolish it. There's very little difference in the big picture outcome of handling those materials. On the question of is it feasible to preserve the 1913 building in situ? The answer is yes, it is. The building's in good condition, as I mentioned, and its current location has meaning to the building historically, as has been previously mentioned. And it doesn't appear to impact the new proposed library building in terms of obstructing its location. Is the 1930s building considered intact? I think, although it's not as it was when it was originally built, there are enough character defining features present in the building that are still valuable, still are important, and still worth keeping. Even though the interior has been changed over the years, there's a lot of exterior fabric that's still present, and some of the interior features still available. There have been a few things that have obviously been maintained on the building, new roof shingles and possibly some new portico columns that have been replaced, but by and large, the building is intact. Is it worth preserving? I guess that's the question we're trying to decide. And I put together some pros and cons for preserving the building, which are listed in my report. Moving on to my cost estimate, I mentioned earlier that I approached it a little differently. When I do an estimate, I like to think through the work that's needed to the building on a detailed in a detailed manner, and make sure that I include all the scope items and that I estimate, in some cases, estimate the material costs and the time involved to do the work, and so that I come out with an estimate that is meaningful and has some detailed basis for it. And I found that the other two estimates, in my reading of them, based on the information provided, I couldn't get that from the estimates. It was as if they were subject based rather than construction based. and that the numbers were estimated based on opinion rather than actually calculating, areas and unit costs and so forth. So that's why I decided to do mine a little differently, and it doesn't totally align in the format of the previous estimates. I thought about doing an additional column and adding that on to their estimates, but it just I didn't think that was the right way to approach it. So I'm open to questions on that when the time comes. I talked a little bit in my report about annual maintenance and operating costs. And some of that is dependent upon what the new use of the building might be, who the tenant is, and whether it's a storage building versus some other use, office or restaurant or whatever the use may be. The operating costs are going to be quite different. Maintenance for a building that is newly renovated is going to be almost the same as for a new building. It's going to be, they're going to be long-term things that need to be done to the building, depending upon what materials and components we're talking about. Those periods are different, but every building needs to be maintained and is going to require a certain amount of work over its life. I also estimated the cost of moving the building to a different site. We have experience doing several projects where we did move buildings. And so I was able to use that information from a scope standpoint and cost standpoint to come up with an estimate for the move, which I included at the back of the report. It really depends on how far you're going with the building in terms of travel and how many intersections and utility lines and lights and poles and traffic signals and so forth you have to take down to get the building through. This is a little bit difficult in that part of the building has a basement and is on a foundation with and the other part is on a slab. We're dealing with two different structural situations which are going to complicate it. It's not as if it had a full basement and we could go right underneath it and take the building easily. So there's some complications and some unknowns there, but I think that the estimate gives you an idea of the things that have to be taken into consideration when moving it to another site. Lastly, question, if the building was demolished, could it somehow be memorialized? And certainly that's a possibility. There's all kinds of possibilities with what you could do for a memorial, everything from a stone with a message to something that's larger and more creatively designed. But in the end, it's really just a memorial to what was. It doesn't really convey the amount of information and value that the existing building would. So that's basically my report, and open to questions about it or about anything else you might have.
Questions for Mr. Kroski?
One quick question. This is Arthur Cassavant, member of the commission. Mr. Kroski, you said your firm has experience using historic tax credits. Two questions. One, have you ever seen historic tax credits used for what would be fundamentally a building upgrade? And this will go to the capacity of the Preservation Commission to raise funding. And the second is, have you ever seen historic tax credits used to move a building from one site to another? Thank you.
I'll answer the second one first. And I've never seen historic tax credits used for moving a building, and I'm fairly certain that they would not be you would not get tax credits for doing so. So we do a lot of work on projects that use historic tax credits as a funding mechanism. There are two programs. There's a state program and a federal program. And they're similar but different. They both are reviewed by the State Historic Preservation Office, and then the federal credits are reviewed by the National Park Service. And basically what a developer will do is file an application with the State Historic Preservation Office to show what is planned for the building, what on a very detailed level. Basically, you identify all the historic character defining features one by one, and you then present how you're going to restore or treat those features in the new design of the building. The State Historic Preservation Office, which I'll call SHPO from now on because it's easier, will review the application, comment on it, and then if you get approved, then you get the green light to go ahead and start construction. You have a reservation for tax credits at that point, which if you follow through on the plan and construct according to the plan or renovate according to the plan, you at the end, you then prove it to SHPO at the end with photos of each character defining feature. And then you get the credit, which you sell to an investor. And it's similar if you do the federal credit, it goes a second step. It just goes down to the Park Service for their review. It's a second review process, a little higher bar than the state program. The state program is 25% of construction cost. And the federal program is 20%, and they're additive. So you can get 45% of your construction cost through investment. So a project like this, though, because of its size, really probably isn't going to use the federal credit. It's too complicated. It has to be, for the federal credit, it has to be an income producing property to qualify. The state program is much easier to use. Eversource buys all the credits or has traditionally bought all the credits for full value, dollar for dollar. But it has to be, it can be a nonprofit or for-profit developer that is the developer of the project. And there are also other grants available for not-for-profits or municipalities through SHPO. One is the SHPO Planning Grant, which is a 50-50 match up to a maximum of $20,000 for planning for studies, condition surveys, architectural and engineering services to plan a preservation project. And then following that, there's a second program called the Historic Restoration Fund, which is a 50-50 matching grant up to $100,000. So it'll do $200,000 scope. And that pays for bricks and mortar. And we've used that program quite a bit. We're working on the Windsor Locks train station, and they are on their third or fourth HRF grant, and they're phasing the restoration of the building piece by piece. So that's another way to approach it.
Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Ward.
John, Dick Ward. Just a quick question, sort of a ballpark estimate of the difference between the cost of total demolition and removal and disposal of the old library versus demolition, removal of everything except for what we're defining as the 1913 library.
Right.
In other words, basically, what saving might there be if in the demolition work, if the 1913 library is retained?
Right. So if you were to calculate this based on, say, square footage, if you save the 1913 and 30s building, you'll save a little less than that percentage value, if you follow what I'm saying. So in other words, it's not equally calculated. If you were to take the other additions down and save the 1913 building, you would, most of the demolition of those other additions will be the same. There's a little more care that goes into demolition as you approach the building that you're saving, and you're going to leave a little bit of material adjacent to the saved building that will have to be selectively demoed. So you will save volume on the effort, and you'll save volume on the dumpster material, but it's not, you can't calculate it purely on a percentage basis because you have to slow down and do a little bit of fussy work at the intersection. So I don't know if I'm clear on explaining that, but
well,
in other words, if the 1913 building were a third and each of the additions were a third, and you demolish just the additions, your demolition cost will not be 2/3. It'll probably be 2/3 and a little bit.
A little bit. What,
yeah,
70% or something?
I would say it's a small little bit. If I had to give a percentage, I would say, I mean, you're going to save the volume of material that goes to the landfill. It's just that the labor is a little fussier at the intersection, because you can't go in there with a big machine and just pull down the connecting elements of the addition that are attached to the 1913 building, because you don't want to take down part of the 1913 building by accident. You have to slow down and stay away from it a little bit, and then you're going to have to use smaller equipment and so forth as you get closer to the 1913 building. So there's
the 1913 building is 3,600 square feet. Isn't that the number that's been used?
Yeah, I calculated 3,734 square feet. That's the gross, based on the dimensions I got out of the materials I reviewed. The interior square footage, because of the wall thickness, the actual usable square footage might be more like 35 or 3,600, but I don't really have drawings that would enable me to get that accurately.
And what is the total existing structure total?
That I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Chris.
Thanks. So would the historic
Sure.
tax credits pay for the purchase of the land? So this is a question I've asked before. So if the gas station adjacent to the plot was sold for $4 million 2 years ago, and a property smaller than this property was sold for 2.3 last week, you have to figure that the land is worth $2+ million. And so what grants are available to purchase the land?
Not any of the ones that I mentioned. I'm not sure that there is anything on the historic preservation side that would pay for the land.
Got it.
So,
So you'd have to pay 2.3 for the land, 2.5, and then spend another million on the building. So 3.5 to get to
So-
that.
well, the tax credits are for the renovation of the building. So if the building is $1 million, you're going to get 250,000 from the state program.
Sure, but you're spending 2.5 to get the 250,000. Okay. And have you had any circumstances where you've been able to, raise the funds for purchase of the land under historic buildings for an outside party to try to renovate?
Not raising the money for it. Usually I'm called in when the property's owned or about to be purchased by a developer.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Mr. Chris?
Yes, sir, Mr. Crosskey. Your information on cost, I'd like to know if we could expand it a bit and talk about the total cost of ownership. So when I think about anything, whether I'm buying a house or buying a car or getting a dog, I don't have a dog, but it's a total cost of ownership. There's an old banking phrase that you never want to take collateral that eats. And the total cost of ownership of using ownership in a broad term of this is not only the initial cost of renovating the building, but ongoing maintenance and whether any revenue generated by the building will be adequate to cover the costs of ongoing renovation and maintenance. I don't think it would be rented out in a triple net basis on a triple net lease, which one would assume take care of many things, but those types of costs can end up eating you if you find your maintenance is X and your revenues are something less than X. In effect, you end up subsidizing the building. And from your report and some of the comments from members of the community is that if there is a preservation of the 1936 and 1913 library, it's really both buildings, not just the original library, that it would be put to some sort of use and not used as a storage facility by the library, which means in effect, the library would be caused to rent it out to somebody in perpetuity and would in effect lose control of the de facto control of the building, and that by doing so, it can count on revenues from that structure and maybe on the hook for ongoing subsidies in order to maintain the structure, because revenues are going to be less than ongoing maintenance and structural repair costs. I'm wondering if you could comment on some of these perpetual costs of ownership of the building and how some of the economics might work and how that number should be added to or subtracted from the estimates you were kind enough to share with us.
Sure. Well, I'm an architect, not a developer. And so my, abilities on the developer side and the financial side are, that's not my professional training, but I do have some exposure to that. And after I got done doing this report, I thought to myself, well, gee, the costs that are being projected in the estimates, is there a way to, do they make sense? I mean, could somebody come along and, buy this building and put in this kind of a renovation and use the tools that are available to them from a funding or tax credit perspective to reduce construction costs? And then what does that turn into as a mortgage? And when you add taxes and other normal building ownership expenses, utilities and so forth, do the numbers work? And, from my basic calculations, they looked like they did. It seemed to make sense. But like any building, if you don't put it to good use and it's not operating in the market in a way that you have income available to support the expenses to own it or run it, then it's not really, that's not a really good solution. And I mean, no building is maintenance free. No building is utility free. So you have to have an income, or you have to have a source to be able to support that building. And so I think you just have to look at from the normal perspective of building ownership and operating expenses and income potential. That's how you have to look at it. Otherwise, it's a special situation where somebody's willing to own it and pay the operating expenses without having drawing support from some other source, and that's not really a working solution.
Well, if we assume that the building has been renovated in some way, and you start off as shell space, and then TIs are provided either from the landlord that gets financed through rent generally, at least to an extent, and additional TIs or tenant improvements would be kicked in by the entity that leases the property.
Right.
But let's say you have a restaurant, as mentioned in your report, or an office building. You need parking. There's no parking on site. You have to create parking, which is an additional expense.
Yeah.
You have to have ingress and egress for this. Do you have adequate parking given zoning rules? ADA access, all those issues, which would be actual costs to make the building usable.
Right.
And I didn't see any of those reasonable externality costs included in your estimate. I wonder if you could share your thoughts with us.
Sure. Well, from an accessibility standpoint, we have a one-story building, and so getting access to the first floor level is really, the only thing we have to worry about. Inside the building, we can modify that to meet accessibility requirements, and those costs are included in the estimates. But with respect to some of the other issues you just mentioned, parking and there are, in most town centers and certainly in cities, there's plenty of parking. There's sometimes there's shared use arrangements and calculations. Many cities now are going to a no parking requirement, understanding that for something like a restaurant, that folks that live in their town centers or city centers are probably going to walk or bike to the restaurant, or they're going to be using parking that businesses aren't going to be using because they're operating in the evening hours. And so I think there are other things. There are other ways to consider that when you're looking at the reuse of this building, but it's not really, that wasn't really, I guess I didn't really address that in my report because it wasn't one of the questions, and I was trying to confine my study to the building itself.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Turner, do you have a question?
Yes, I did. Mr. Krosky, it's Kent Turner. Hi. I have two questions. One is on the MEP and the fire protection.
Yes.
Your line item. Could you go into a little detail about what assumptions you made as far as the scope of what would the equipment be? And I'm not asking for a lot of detail. I just want to get a better feeling what went into that cost. And then also the same kind of thing for the interior finishes.
Okay. All right. So for MEPs, that's mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, I budgeted for 100% replacement. I'm assuming that we can, when the additions are demolished, that we'll be able to use the utility entrance, the existing utility entrance from the street, and tap onto the end of the those services and bring them into the basement of the building so that we don't have to do street cuts. And then it was all new equipment in the basement, heating and air conditioning. And then, you know, there may be a piece of equipment exterior to the building, like a condenser, which could be on the roof or could be on the ground. And then electrically, we can feed new wiring from the basement from underneath or from the attic above down into the walls. So I looked at it as if it's going to be, if we're going to have all new mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. I think there was I saw something about sprinklers and fire alarms, and I don't think you'll need a sprinkler system in this. That's going to be use driven, but for most small one-story buildings, a sprinkler system is not required. Same thing, fire alarm system. And in terms of interior fit out, again, that really is going to depend on what the use of the building is and who the occupant is going to be. Because if you were going to use the building as storage, you might be able to use the interior the way it is right now, minus the furniture. There wouldn't be any real demand for high finishes or renovated finishes. And so the cost of the fit out would be low. Whereas if you were, if it was going to be used as professional offices, then you might have, depending upon how many private offices versus open office area there are, that would affect the number of partitions and the cost of that build out. And certainly if it were a restaurant, then you have high costs there. So each occupancy is going to have a different effect on the interior build out and the costs related to that. So in my estimate, I've assumed something along the lines of professional office, you know, middle of the road build out.
Okay, good. Back to the MEP, if I understood correctly, this is basically would be a standalone building. It would not be dependent upon the new library.
That's how I looked at it, yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yes.
Anybody else? Mr. Krosky, so is there, and you know, you've certainly been listening. I think some other commissioners have maybe hinted at this. So option one is in situ. Option two is you move it off campus. While not from a preservation perspective, an ideal option, and I know how you talk about sense of place, and I completely get that. But is there, and the other thing I'll add is the applicant has said that the full green is very important to their plan. So given all that, I mean, is there any other creative ways, and not just memorializing where it's a, you know, it's a rock or a statue or a model, but are there any other creative ways to think about somehow preserving part of the 1913 library, let's say, and having it someplace on campus? It is, I mean, as you thought about this, is there, you know, less than ideal from a preservation perspective, but is there any other ways to potentially preserve some of this?
You know, one of the difficulties is that we're talking about a three-dimensional building that has materials that has you know, historic materials, but also has space inside of it. And so it's hard to think of a way to create a replacement for that. I mean, to use that if it's not its essence as a building, you know, with space, with materials, with an exterior visual character. Anything, you know, if you take a wall away or you take, you know, you save just the facade, it's not really a building anymore. It's a piece of a building. And so it loses a lot of its significance, because the whole idea about preservation in this case is about it as a building, as a three-dimensional structure with space inside, you know, materials that represent the technology of the time, and a style that represents the technology of the time. And so it's really there really isn't anything that is even close to approaching the significance of the building itself.
To the extent of utter demolition.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's if you lose, you know, if the building loses its character defining features and it's not a building anymore, then it's not, you know, the value is, from a preservation standpoint, the value is gone. I mean, there may be some sentimental value in saving a cornerstone, or you know, doing something different with the materials on site, but it's not preservation. It's just memorializing or reusing a piece of the building to, but it doesn't have much value from a cultural or educational or economic standpoint.
Okay, anybody else? Mr. Chris?
A follow-up question, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Just if you can clarify this for me, Mr. Crosskey, it seems implicit in your documentation you were kind enough to share with us that preservation of the 1913 and 1936 library, in effect returning it to the status quo ante in 1936, at least from an exterior envelope perspective, implicitly assumes that the library would be caused to rent the building out to a tenant and have a tenant on its property for the indefinite future, and it would retain all the costs and risks of property ownership, with the potential for having those costs and risks ameliorated to some extent or larger extent by any rent generated from the lease of the building. But whether that amount would be adequate to cover its costs or not is undetermined.
Yeah, I think that's a financial effort. That's an effort of planning and financial planning that has to be followed through on to find an outcome that works. And I think from the possibilities are, the library can keep the building and use it for its own purposes, or it can keep the building and rent it out, and hopefully the rent will cover the costs of maintaining it and operating it, or they could sell it or gift it to another owner who could then make financial sense out of it.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Everybody good? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Crosskey.
Thank you.
Attorney Sullivan, do you have anything to add this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the commission. I am Pat Sullivan from Cohen & Wolf, appearing on behalf of the New Canaan Preservation Alliance. We appreciate all the time you've given us and our opportunity to speak tonight. The Alliance fully recognizes and supports the need for a new library. The mission of the Alliance is to preserve historic buildings in situ. Alliance membership includes professionals in the field. Many are recognized authorities, including those who helped prepare the written materials we shared and those who assisted in the physical evaluation of the 1913 building. The Alliance is genuinely committed to protecting the character of New Canaan and its historic past, to raising the requisite renovation funds necessary through already recognized grants, tax credits, and donors, and to securing future uses if the 1913 building cannot be used by the new library. The Alliance already knows of nonprofits in need of and wanting to rent the space. As the Alliance has said, its intention is to be collaborative. The Alliance is willing to work with the library and the town to accomplish its mission. The offers the Alliance is making is to partnership with the town and the New Canaan Library with awareness of New Canaan Library's expanding programs. They are not looking to buy the land and the building from the library. They would renovate it and give it back to the library unless the library did not want to use it, and then the Alliance would secure a tenant. The Alliance reviewed with interest the cross-key analysis, which validates the Alliance's presentation and evaluation of the condition of the building. Carl Rothbart and Keith Simpson's plans are zone compliant with current zoning regulations. The current zoning regulations protect historic structures in the Village District and preserve the character of downtown New Canaan. The Alliance encourages the Planning and Zoning Commission to follow their very thoughtful existing regulations and guidelines. Changing the zoning and dismissing the Village District guidelines by adopting a library overlay zone could form the basis of an appeal of the approval. The library's position that the green proposed is compliant with the POCD is mistaken. Open space is intended outside the urban core under the POCD. Keith Simpson's plan serves public use and accessibility and would accommodate outdoor programming. The 1913 building acts as an important buffer for the design of the green and at the same time weaves the historic structure into the fabric of important corner of downtown New Canaan. It also serves as a noise buffer. Preservation is future-oriented, not about ancestor worship, but about creating places with interesting stories for those in the present and our grandchildren, carrying these stories of communities forward to future generations. And as public policy, preservation has well-established standards to accomplish this with integrity by keeping historic buildings in their original places, like primary manuscripts without editing. Keeping the library in situ will accomplish this. The Alliance is asking for a condition on any approval that would allow the 1913 building to be preserved. And we thank you for your time.
Thank you, Attorney Sullivan. Mr. Galante? Then do we have Mr. Galante in the room, so to speak?
Yes, he's in the room. Mr. Chairman, do you want to move on to the town engineer, and I'll find out if Mr. Galante is here?
Sure. Mrs. Copley?
Yes, good evening. I wrote a memo earlier this afternoon to Lynn, and I copied the other members of the team. We had a good call earlier today with members of the library team and their engineering group, Langen. And there are still some open items with engineering that we still need to discuss, but my recommendation was, as in the conclusion of my memo, that if we could make the condition of special permit and site plan approval be the review and approval of a full set of drawings and report by our department, we would feel comfortable going forward that way.
Okay, super. Thank you. And that's contained in the memo you submitted to us. Is that correct? Or
Correct.
okay, great. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have we found Mr. Galante?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
I walked away for 1 second after, I don't know.
Well, it's Murphy's
couple
Law.
Are you ready for me?
Yes, go, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. Mike Galante, Odyssey in Hanover. And what I'd like to do for, maybe 10 minutes or so is kind of summarize what we've been working on with the town, with the Tiger Man planning and town engineer for probably since last summertime. It's about 10 months or so. And I'll start out with the parking and then we'll get into traffic. Last summer, we started looking at information provided by the applicant, really to some extent on parking information and then certainly traffic. But from a parking perspective, we looked at different neighboring communities, Westport, Richfield, Darien, with their libraries, size of the buildings, number of parking spaces available. And between the town planner and my office, we spoke to the town planners in each of those communities. We actually worked on Richfield and Darien some time ago. We looked at how they were operating special events as far as their parking need, outside the parking availability, and in many cases, and I think in each one of those, maybe not necessarily Richfield, but they had other parking available other than the parking, let's call it on site of the library. Richfield, for example, has a theater attached to it, so they shared that space. Darien had a municipal parking lot and some private space nearby that was used for events and overflow. And Westport certainly has municipal parking down the hill from their facility and adjacent to downtown. And what we did over a period of time is looked at other standards followed by ITE, which is the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and what they suggest as far as parking demand for a library. And that's typically based on square footage. So we use that information. We know the size of the existing library in New Canaan, about 35,000 square feet. And we know that the proposal is for about 41,000 square feet, so slightly bigger footprint and building in the future. And we Odyssey in Hanover, along with the town planner's office, came up with 102 parking spaces needed for a new library in New Canaan. This was before there was much discussion about the center school parking lot, for example. And at this time last summer, almost this time last summer, there was an underground parking garage under the new building itself, which would have provided about 80 spaces. So we developed a concept that you need about 102 spaces. And then we went to the next step, which was, what do we think about the underground parking garage, if you will, underneath the brand new building? To be honest, I wasn't crazy about it for a couple of reasons. One is internal circulation, a confined space. It would function as a drop-off area for potentially young children internally, go up in an elevator into the building itself. The concept also showed a book drop-off area. So you're using all the parking aisles for a number of things, looking for a parking space, dropping off children, students, whatever, and lining up to drop off books or book return, if you will. Another part of that issue, which was a big concern of mine, was the access drive would have been placed to South Main Street, north of Maple Street, at a point where you had a grade coming up to the street from the underground parking garage. And all of those issues were a concern to me. And I actually made the suggestion that I wasn't really for an underground parking garage, if you will. I didn't get involved with dollars and cents. That's not my role and that's not my background. But I looked at it from a circulation, certainly safety in this case, and operational characteristics of a garage. And I think others were thinking along the same lines, and over a period of time, the garage concept really didn't go much further than that. And it shifted to the possibility of using the center school parking lot, which happens to be across the street from the library. That parking lot, which is town-owned, used for various reasons. I'm sure today it's certainly used by the library. And keep in mind, when we were doing all this work last year and starting last summer and into the last fall, we were in a pandemic conditions. So going out to watch the library and look at activities and look where people are parking and how to walk into the front door of the library was really not a possibility. So we were at a disadvantage, but we quite frankly worked around it as best we could. Knowledge of previous activities at the library and so on. So we had the parking at 102 spaces in total. It came back down to 76 spaces would be provided in the center school parking lot. That included the handicap spaces that are near the existing driveway today to Maple Street. And then there were the 26 staff spaces at St. A's across South Avenue that would be used by staff only and not by a resident or a visitor to the library itself. At the same time, or about the same time, the applicant, Langdon Engineers, were looking at parking, and we kept everything separate, but they came up with a very similar number as far as parking need or parking demand. Theirs was slightly lower than ours, I think about 10 spaces or so. They look at it really from a perspective of IT, a parking generation or parking demand. We use that in combination with actual other libraries nearby. I'm shortening this up, of course, but overall, it was decided that 102 spaces would be appropriate as far as the parking provided for the new library. And that went through a process and was agreed on by the town and different commissions and so on, that 102 spaces would be provided for the library. And in this case, was not a parking garage anymore, but at the center school parking lot across the street from the library. And at the moment, it's the existing layout of the parking lot. There's some discussion about, what if you need more parking, and I'll get into that later on as far as modifications to that parking lot in the future. Towards the end of last year, we started getting more into the traffic aspects of the proposal. The applicant did original traffic counts in September of 2018. And since we were in a pandemic, there was no opportunity to really do any new traffic counts because at that point, pretty much everyone was working from home. And the traffic volume or levels on area roads was certainly not what it was before March of last year. So we didn't do any new counts. The applicant didn't do any counts. We certainly didn't ask for any. So we relied on the data they had fortunately obtained in September of 2018, which included the 4 intersections around the site block, if you will, on Cherry Street at the 2 signalized intersections, one at South Avenue, one at Main Street, and then the 2 intersections on Maple Street at South Main and Maple Street at South Avenue. Those intersections were counted a weekday afternoon from generally 3 to 6 o'clock. They focused on the 4 to 5 o'clock being the peak hour, which in this case was really the peak hour of commuters and activity at the library itself. Fortunately, the library has very good information on, they know how many people walk in and out of the building on an hourly basis, I think forever. So the information was very helpful. It was done by day, by hour, and so on. And so we used that information to really gauge, what day of the week was the busiest and what happened on a Saturday. The applicant also did some observations and counts at the driveways to the library. Today, of course, the library has essentially 3 driveways. 2 driveways on Maple Street, one on South Avenue, and one to Cherry Street. The South and the Cherry Streets driveways are exits only, essentially. In the Maple, one is a one-way entrance and one is a 2-way driveway. Keep in mind in the future, the library, other than the now access to 4 handicap spaces from South Avenue, essentially during this entire process didn't have any access to any parking on the site itself or on the block where the library building would be rebuilt. So we had 4 driveways going to 2 driveways, and that concern shows up as you look at traffic volumes in the future when you go through a process of looking at a new library fully activated and in full use by 2023, which is the design year for the library itself. So what the applicant did, and we went through, and as you know, we went through lots of reviews and lots of discussions, and Langdon was very responsive to each of our comments and questions and requests for additional information. They essentially did 4 reports, and more recently we had 4 letters from February 16th, March 30th, April 20th, and more recently May 12th, was basically tracking through the comments from either a parking perspective or a traffic perspective. And the last one, May 12th, was pretty much a sign off, if you will, or a findings letter. Looking at our recommendations and findings based on all the information provided by the applicant, our discussions with the town, which was very helpful, and in our involvement for quite some time, which was also appreciated because it was very helpful to us. So with the traffic, again, new traffic counts were not completed by us or by the applicant, so we used the 2018 volumes. And during the pandemic, just to make everyone feel comfortable, there is a process that we go through in the traffic world, if you will, as far as collecting data or using data to do an analysis for a traffic study of whatever type it might be, in this case, an application. Connecticut DOT lets us use traffic data that's within 5 years. So we can go back, if we started last year, we were pretty much go back to 2015. Now we're really up to 2016, but the data was collected in 2018 by the applicant. So the data is still very good. And what that data for 2018, what was done is expanded, in this case, to reflect a 2023 design year. And the way that the volumes are grown is to apply, in their case, I believe it was a 1% per year growth factor, which is based on Connecticut DOT Planning Division information. The state has growth rates for traffic in every town in the state of Connecticut, and that's done on an annual basis. So if I have a project, here in Fairfield, we call Condot planning, and they say, okay, use 0.6% or use 0.8% per year, and you apply that to the number of years to estimate your future traffic as a background condition before a new library is put in place. Keep in mind, in this place, we have an active library, although it was pretty quiet for quite a while, and it's now open again. So what had to be done was Langdon had to remove the existing library traffic and then put back in the library traffic to account for a new library, new access drives to the Center Street parking lot, remove it from the driveways to the, let's call it the site property at the moment, and redistribute that traffic into the roadway system. That was done for a weekday afternoon and a Saturday late morning, and the peak on Saturday, by the way, is 11 to noon. The information provided by Langdon, and quite frankly, it was the way we were able to confirm it, was information provided by a library as far as activity in and out of the building, in other words, people counts, activities going in on an hourly basis. And the Saturday activity, to be honest, I was a little surprised, is actually 15% lower on a Saturday, late Saturday morning compared to a weekday afternoon. Langdon, being conservative, used the weekday volumes for both the weekday afternoon analysis and the Saturday late morning analysis. And they brought that through the process. During the process, as everyone knows, we had comments on probably every aspect of the traffic study, whether it was baseline volumes, future volumes, actually future volumes, we didn't have any comments, site traffic, distribution, and so on. And that was tracked through the entire process to bring us to a conclusion, which I'll get to in just a couple minutes. So the next step was to analyze the intersections, how are they operating today, in the future, in 2023, with the existing library still in place, obviously open, and then in 2023 with a new library in place and different or modified traffic patterns to reflect a new library, a slightly bigger library, which is accounted for. It was estimated that traffic would increase about 15% with the increase in the building size. That we based on information provided by the library. And we have a little bit of concern with that, but I'll touch on how we address that as we go through this process. Through the analyses provided by Langdon, reviewed by us, and what we do is it's a model, it's a computer model. They share that model with us. We have the program, same as they do and every other traffic engineer probably in the country. And we run it on our own to see if we agree with the conclusions, the inputs, and so on. And what we found during the process, and it changed during the process from February to, let's say, March or April, is that the results of the analysis showed traffic congestion, vehicle queuing on Maple Street going westbound from the library building entrance, if you will, towards the South Avenue intersection. As you know, that's a stop sign control. Everyone approaching from Maple Street, in this case westbound only, have a stop sign. So the car on South Avenue has the right of way. What that showed was a long vehicle queue, delays, and just like in school, we use ABCs. A is great, no delay. As you go through the scale, C is average delay, average conditions, and acceptable. D is also acceptable, but more delay. And in the traffic engineering world, you have E, which is used to be considered capacity of a road or an intersection. F, we used to call a failure. Because Fs show up more often in today's world, is simply more delay and more congestion. So it showed us that there were delays on the Maple Street westbound approach to South Avenue, which was a concern of ours because, and this happened on Saturday, not during the week in the afternoon, but Saturday late morning. And what that showed us was it blocked the driveway coming out of Center Street, a Center School parking lot, and the cars actually went over the proposed crosswalk from the parking lot to the front of the building. So in analyzing that and looking at that, we suggested, in conjunction with the town engineer and I think planning, we all had this discussion, DPW with Tiger, that it would be appropriate to convert the entrance only driveway into this parking lot from South Avenue to a two-way driveway, an entrance lane in and an entrance lane out. Town engineer suggested that the alignment of that driveway be modified to a straight run, if you will, from the parking lot to the street, instead of the angle, if you will, that brings it towards the southerly property line and the residential building or home on the south side of that street and in that corner of South Avenue. So what that does, and again, we asked the applicant to remodel it, which they did, and that took traffic off of Maple Street and off of the driveway in front of the building, which was a benefit because we have to remember we have pedestrians crossing Maple Street from the parking lot, which I'll touch on in a minute. But what that did was it reduced the delay, reduced the queuing significantly enough that we were now comfortable with the safety aspects of Maple Street operating with a new crosswalk, a relocated crosswalk, use of the driveway from the parking lot, and now shifting some of that traffic out of the parking lot directly to South Avenue. And yes, South Avenue is a state road. The applicant would need an encroachment permit from the state to do that, and that should not be an issue or a problem. It will meet the standards for sightlines. They provided that information in our request. We commented that it would be done a little differently. And in our review of that in the field, I'm comfortable that we would have the appropriate sight distance out there. It's based on actual speed, not the posted speed limit. So the distances will be a little bit longer than was shown in their report. And they'll do that as part of the permit process. So what we found was that the crosswalk, and I'll touch on that in a minute, where it's proposed is appropriate. Maple Street has a reduction in traffic impacts with a new driveway exit from the parking lot, and that relieves the concerns we have with Maple Street itself. There were some discussions about closing Maple Street from months and months and months ago. I didn't agree with that, although it was a nice idea, but as you may know, or certainly know, is Maple Street functions as a bypass to Cherry Street. So someone on South or someone on Main will use Maple to avoid Cherry Street and the two traffic signals. And it carries anywhere from 100 to 200 vehicles in a peak hour that we would actually relocate to other local roads to the south of Maple Street or to Cherry Street itself, which means that those intersections would have a greater delay, an increase in delay, which would not be recommended. So we recommend keeping Maple Street open. There was some discussions about relocating Maple Street to the southerly part of the parking lot. There are great issues on Main Street, so that quickly went away. So, but I just want to assure you, we looked at that along with town staff, DPW, planning, and the town engineer. That was all part of all of our discussions over many months. So in the end, Maple Street stays where it is. There was some discussion with the crosswalk to make it a raised crosswalk because of the high level of pedestrian activity. And the main concern was because we have handicap spaces in the existing parking lot that are now being relocated, and the sidewalk is being relocated into the parking lot to align with the crosswalk. And now there are 4 handicap spaces to the rear of the new library building with access from South Avenue. I think we all feel comfortable that we can eliminate, for now, a raised crosswalk on Maple Street. And I say for now because part of the recommendations and findings and all of the discussions, and not just me, and I'm not taking credit for it, but part of all the discussions was that since we're dealing with a pandemic condition and traffic data that may not be exactly what we may find out there when the library opens as a new library in a couple of years, there should be an agreement or a condition of approval if this was to be approved, that the library is responsible for doing a new traffic study and a new parking study probably a year after the building is built and fully occupied and operating. I wouldn't do that, the third week of a new library because you would not get typical patterns at all. So all of those aspects went into it. I didn't mean to leave the event parking and activities out of that, but we did certainly discuss that. And there's parking needs for that are outside of the peak, a weekday afternoon or a Saturday morning. There's more parking available in the Center Street lot, in the parking lot closer to the downtown, across Cherry Street. And there's certainly on event night parking on the local streets. So we looked at that, but we decided that there wasn't any real need for physically additional parking because we felt there was parking available that exists today for an event that may occur. Maybe not everyone would agree with that, but we didn't see the point of building more parking or looking for more parking other than what's available in the immediate neighborhood. Findings, if you will, the race crosswalk is being pushed off and the police commission approved, I think last week or the week before, a flush crosswalk, different pavement treatment, appropriate warning signs to alert motorists that someone's crossing the street. Certainly the sightlines are actually very good there. The handicap spaces in the Center School parking lot are being removed from the access drive from Maple Street and put internal to the parking lot. And a new sidewalk is being built or proposed straight from those spaces across the grass along the stone wall to align exactly with the proposed crosswalk that takes you up the, I believe, steps and ramp to the entrance to the building itself. So I think I've covered everything. If I missed anything, I'm sure you'll ask and we can cover it, but that's kind of a big picture of the work that staff and my office put together with the help of the library and their consultants over a 10-year period, a 10-month period. And I can certainly answer any questions you have.
Questions for Mr. Galante?
Hi, this is Kristen Nielsen. I needed clarification on something.
Yes.
You talked about, you reviewed the potential to realign Maple Street to the south, and you said that that was fairly quickly dismissed. I just was confused on what were the issues with doing that.
The main issue was for example, let's say we put the Maple Street along the southerly property line of that existing parking lot. If you come in from South Avenue where the driveway is today, it's level and flat. You bring it across the parking lot, which is fairly level and flat. Then you get to Main Street and you're maybe 10 feet higher than Main Street itself. So there was a grade change that we discussed with DPW and it was, I don't want to say it was quickly dismissed, but it really didn't last that long as far as a viable option, although it would have been nice to take Maple Street out of the middle of the library and its parking. And I think we would all agree with that. And in moving the Maple Street halfway through the parking lot wasn't really any benefit. You had some parking you would have some parking near the library and you still have more parking across the street from Maple Street. So it was decided really leave Maple Street where it is. And I don't mean to simplify that, but that was really the outcome of that process.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Chris?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. It's John Chris speaking. Two areas. One, just to be clear, as far as ingress and egress to the Maple Street, to the Center School lot, there will be both ingress and egress on Maple Street, essentially where it is now, correct?
Essentially, yes. Yes.
And there will be an exit on the southwest corner, and it will be not a curve, but really you go straight to a stop sign with an ingress and egress, and the right turn is going to be a lot easier than the left turn given traffic.
True, absolutely, yes. But that was analyzed, and the delay it was an acceptable delay coming out of the stop sign, out of the driveway itself.
Fair enough. Did you consider having a enhanced crosswalk across South Avenue? I know when the farmers market was there, it was tough crossing, and some people may be walking across that street to get to and from the library. I'm wondering if an enhanced crosswalk there might be a useful public safety activity.
We didn't really discuss it in detail, not to make any excuses, but it is a state highway. And the state looks at, enhanced crosswalks a little differently.
Okay.
Although I know of an enhanced crosswalk up in Georgetown on Route 57 that was put in as part of a walkway system in, I'll call it the downtown or the business district of Georgetown.
Yeah.
In Reading, I guess that's the edge of Reading there.
Yeah.
But you don't see it too much. And it's something that we can always be investigated further. Yes.
Fair enough. And you said at the end you would advocate as a condition of approval, assuming there's an approval, that a traffic study be done about a year hence, just to see how, or after the library's up and running and we're known to have pandemic operating conditions, to see what might be done. What is your sense of what some of the conclusions might be from such a study? What are some of the worries you would have that might need to be addressed through such a study? And
Well,
I wonder if you can maybe anticipate some of those now.
Yeah, I don't have any worries at the moment, but it's a
Okay.
twofold purpose. One is to really see what the parking demand is at this new library. I think everyone would probably agree a new library might attract more people, certainly at the beginning. That would likely calm down over a period of time. But, we don't really have any strong data on what the parking demand was with the library before the pandemic, although there's information on use of the parking lot today, the library's parking lot and the use of the center school parking lot. And I think, at least I would feel comfortable or more comfortable if we had some real data, let's say a year after the library opens up. From a traffic perspective, I think we'd all would agree that traffic patterns will change, or they have changed, and they won't necessarily go back to what they were before, because more people will probably work at home than before the pandemic. So, I see patterns just simply different. Peak hours seem to be more spread out on the highways, for example, as opposed to everyone leaving the office at 5, 6 o'clock at night. You could be on 95 with a Merit at 3:30 or 3:45 or 4 o'clock, and you're sitting in traffic. So patterns really have changed. I know when we had was it the Great Depression that we called it? Great Recession back in 09, 07, 08, 09. I happened to be doing work in your town, and we looked at traffic data from the state for all the state roads, and traffic volumes actually decreased by 25% throughout the town of New Canaan. And I can tell you, it took years to increase to where it might be, before that recession, if you will. It doesn't bounce back the year after a recession. It takes years. And just another example is before that whole thing, growth was typically 2% per year on traffic. After that, and since, and now we're talking 10 years later, it's typically it was no percent increase for a while. Then it was a 0.5%. And in many cases, it has not hit 1% per year growth, where it was 2% typically before that recession. So that had a significant impact. And I'm pretty confident we're going to see a significant change in patterns from this pandemic, without a doubt. More people are working home. They realize they don't need to take the train to the city, as we see at the train stations. So new traffic counts in, let's say, 2023, I would guess we're going to be beyond the pandemic and maybe a new normal, as people say. And that's going to tell us really, how roads are operating specifically around the library. And if there's anything different than what was the conclusion in the Langdon report and our conclusion on the data provided to us and our observations. I mean, I know the intersections quite well. I've been around town for a long time, but things are going to change a little bit. We just have to track it and see what it means, and learn from it. And from that, I think the applicant, I would think, be a condition of approval, if I can speak that way, that they may need to add parking spaces in the parking lot, for example, reconfigure it, remove some grass, and maybe change something in there. From a traffic perspective, there's not much you can do as far as changing things, but safety is always an important thing. You mentioned a crosswalk, and that's something that could be tracked in the future, and I think that's a very good idea. So that's the suggestion. And as I mentioned to your town planner today, we work for a lot of towns, and I do a lot of work for private developers around. And I'm seeing more and more where towns are saying, you know what, after 6 months after your building is finished, whatever it might be, you need to come back and look at traffic and do some counts and see if it's really generating what you guys said in the traffic report. It's often very close, I might add. but things are a little different now.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you, Mr. Galante. Well done.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. So I think how we would like to address the comments that have been made tonight is I may take a little out of order of the way it was presented, after we finished. In other words, Kathleen Corbett gave her report, and rather than address hers first, I thought the first one we would address would be the Mr. Crosskey's cost estimates and our comments to those comments, if that would be fine with the commission. So, because I think one of the points that we would like to make is that while Attorney Sullivan said that she and her group believe that it validates her group's position on the costs. I mean, and she also said the condition of the building, which we are not contesting. But I think even Mr. Crosskey's analysis, I think if my math is right, is like 63% higher than that of the New Canaan Preservation Alliance's group. But our owner's representative, Paul Stone, did an analysis. I believe he submitted that to you in the record. You may not have had an opportunity to review that with all the other flood of information you've been receiving recently. But I would just like him to briefly summarize his comments to Mr. Crosskey's comments, just to point out where we think, although Mr. Crosskey had a great, he did a lot of work in a short period of time. We have some comments we'd like to make about those results as well as others. So if I can have Mr. Stone make a presentation, if he's available, if Lynn can find him, that would be great.
And we see him, he's on.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, hi. Paul Stone here. I'm the owner's representative working with CARP Builders here in New Canaan. I submitted to the commission an analysis of the renovation rebuild of the 1913, and just quick background, and I won't get really into the weeds, but a year ago there was an estimate done from the Architectural Preservation Studio in response to Durham Consulting back in March of 2020. And it was posted on the website, the APS Architectural Preservation Studios. Their website posted what their cost to renovate would be, and it was $828,000. We had developed an analysis of that and showed some of the significant major components of the building that would need to be renovated and rebuilt. And the long and short is there are several key things that were missing. And when Crosskey did their analysis, their recent one on May 20th, they actually, as Mr. Smith had indicated, they were 63% higher than APS's, which is certainly moving in the right direction. But they, Mr. Crosskey, in our opinion, didn't include sufficient carry numbers from some major components, which would include the MEP, which is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, along with the fire protection upgrade, which would be needed to create a code-compliant structure for any kind of commercial use like this. So 3,600 square feet you would need, based on Turner Construction's long experience with these kinds of projects, along with Durham Consulting, who does the same thing, that you need to have a complete building that is up to code. It's largely MEP, and it's also the finishes that would be needed to be replaced, and that would be triggered by the need to abate the hazardous material in this. These estimates didn't include that because Mr. Krosky correctly spoke that that would be whether you're preserving or demolishing in total, that really wouldn't be much of a difference. And we would agree with that position. So that wasn't included here. But what that does do is it triggers the need to replace all those finishes in one aspect, as well as needing to upgrade the electrical, mechanical, and plumbing system, along with fire protection to get it to a code-compliant building. So, and there are a few other components that were, in our opinion, not sufficient budget carries. But we think the real number, based on experience with Turner and with Durham, is closer to perhaps the Turner number, but certainly north of Mr. Krosky's number. So we feel that the 1.3 that he indicated is certainly moving in the right direction, but we still think it is inadequate to fully renovate and rebuild the 1913 building, all 3,600 square feet of it. So that's the gist of it. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have, but that's the high level view.
And Mr. Bash?
Hi, James Bash. So one of the major differences, it seemed like, between Mr. Rothbart's or the NCPA's cost estimate of roughly $850,000 and Mr. Krosky's was a few $100,000 of potential contingency costs that were incorporated into Mr. Krosky's estimates that were not incorporated into Mr. Rothbart's estimates. And my question for you, Mr. Stone, is, in your experience, how often are those contingencies actually realized? So we can kind of game if there's $200,000 of contingencies in there, what might be an expected value for a given project, and what percentage of that contingency might actually be realized?
It's a good question, and it's an important question. And the long and short is it gets used because this isn't a design that all of these people using this concept. It's actually a concept they're basing these estimates on. It's not a design. This is all actually pre-design. So the one thing that's known is the building and the approximate size, which is 3,600 square feet, which I think everyone agrees on. But based on experience of what major components would need to go into rebuilding and reconstituting it this early on in the conceptual stage, which is, like I mentioned, pre-design, you would need to use and carry the kinds of contingencies that you see here, because along the way, as you actually start the design and develop it, you get better and better understanding of what's involved. You have better information upon which different trades and suppliers you can consult with to get more accurate information. You wind up using that in my experience, and as well as Turner's and in Durham's, and that's the reason why they carry those contingencies at the level that they do. So they're actually necessary, they're needed. We feel the numbers that Turner and Durham are presenting are very close to what would wind up being a fully designed and developed plan that could obtain a building permit and could be constructible. And we feel those numbers are much closer to what it would wind up being.
Thanks.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Thank you, Mr. Stone. Mr. Smith?
Yes, if there are no more questions for Mr. Stone, then what I'd like to do now is turn sort of together to the question on the comment on how from the library's view on the report that Kathleen Corbett provided, and some of the, what the process was and where we are. And of course, as I mentioned at the outset of the hearing earlier tonight, the New Canaan Preservation Alliance had proposed a condition of approval. And in fact, that was reinforced by Attorney Sullivan. And I want to sort of have Lisa Oldham comment on the process that we all went through in the mediation and where we are now and why, I wrote my letter at the request of the library. So I would like to ask Lisa Oldham to comment on the process that Selectman Corbett was kind enough to undertake, as you said, where angels fear to tread. So if Lisa can be brought forward.
Ms. Oldham, we should be able to hear you.
Yep. So hi. Yes, thank you. It's Lisa Oldham here, Director of the Library. We were really grateful to Kathleen for undertaking that process and for bringing everyone together. We had, of course, met previously during the course of the last 18 months. We had met multiple times with members from the Preservation Alliance, but it was really good to do so in person, as Kathleen suggested. It was very clear also, as she suggested, that there wasn't a lot of common ground to be found. Yes, I'm not sure. Sorry, Brian, I'm not sure what part of this you were suggesting I talk about.
Well, I mean, I think that just that, we recounted that, and then we have this condition of approval, and there was an exploration of alternatives, but that really hasn't gone very far, I guess, was sort of the summation that she made. And I think I mentioned in my letter, for example, that we were the Preservation Alliance, and its only view seems to be that it's either these buildings are retained in situ, complete, but not be moved either on-site, off-site, or even any part of them moved on-site, off-site. So that was something that where I think the commission may be getting that the parties are far apart, and it's like a bridge too far. We couldn't seem to bridge that. So I just wanted to give a background as how we got there and what the process was. So so now that there is that, and of course in one of the points that we would like to make, and I made in my letter and in sort of in direct response to Attorney Sullivan's comments earlier tonight, is that she's saying, well, you should basically retain the village district zoning regulations and impose this requirement on the library to accept basically a third party coming up with the funding to save this building, to which the library objects. And as to the village district zone question, as opposed to the library zone, I mean, that's really for this commission to decide. I mean, she mentioned the threat of an appeal. I'm really kind of sort of dumbstruck on the question, because as I understand it, having been doing this for 35 years, is that this is a legislative enactment. So it's a legislative enactment. You can choose not to do it, or you can choose to do it, but it's a legislative enactment, and it's very rarely are such legislative enactments overturned. So I was just sort of surprised. We're not here to ask or to do that. What we're here to is we're trying to put together the best proposal we can, and we think that the overlay zone, and while there may be other ways to accomplish it, but I think what we're trying to do is to provide the library with a means to go forward in the best possible way and to protect that property in an appropriate manner. And that's that's a position we've taken that we presented to you, and we're gonna have to leave it in your hands to decide if we've done our job on that. But I think it's not like an either or proposition. I think, you are protecting the heritage. And of the architecture with our mid 20th century modern form. I think that's a very important point. And I think in fairness, we've met at a minimum 11 out of the 12 goals of the conservation plan development. And the historic preservation aspect is, again, we think we are even meeting that, if you will, with the design of the new building. So we have done a great deal on that. And that's one of the reasons why we think this is a worthy application process. Of course, it has to, you would have to approve the overlay zone and the map amendment before we even get to the special permit site plan. And we understand that. And that's why we're making that argument to you, is that this is, because you have to make a finding that it is consistent with the plan of conservation and development. And we believe we've established that. But we don't have to meet each one on its own merits 100%, but it's a balancing, but that's for you to decide, not for us to decide. We're putting the information we have before you for your consideration. And we know this is also a very difficult situation that you have before you. I mean, this is what, as I think the chairman said, the fifth hearing. This is not a straightforward, easy application for you to handle. So we're providing what we can. I think that we are still trying to find a way to balance this. It's frankly very hard to find common ground when the only compromise we hear is that that you just have to leave it there, the buildings in situ. I mean, that takes away the library green, and that's sort of what we think are the very important amenities for New Canaan, for the library, and it is our property. And that's another not minor point. So that's where we are right now. I think that I just wanted to mention one detail on the traffic and the parking, is that we do have a very formal agreement now with St. A's for the 26 spaces, just so that I just want to put that on the record. It's been signed, sealed, and delivered, so to speak, with St. A's. So we have the parking there as available. But unless members of the commission have questions other than on the preservation, but on the traffic or the drainage, then we're getting quite close to the end. But I think there may be questions you have on preservation issues as well. I don't know. So.
Yeah, Mr. Smith, I do want to have the commissioners ask questions across all of the issues.
Okay.
Is it okay to do that now, or do you want to present a few more things?
No, I don't think that there's anything else that we need to present at this time. We obviously will be happy to respond to questions across the board. I just wanted to make sure I covered some of the issues that were most pertinent and in response to the speakers you just had.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Commissioners, questions for the library team?
I just have an observation, Mr. Smith, on.
Admin, just state your name for the record.
Sorry, this is Dan Radman. In what you just mentioned about the preservation side of the conversation, being adamant that there's no other option other than the preservation of the building, isn't it fair to say that the library's position is just as steadfast, that there's no other option except keep the existing building as currently designed?
We've been thinking about that, so we're trying to. I mean, because I think if I don't know if you had a chance to read my letter, Mr. Radman, but that I had submitted, and I think it was only submitted yesterday. So
I have it. Yep.
Yeah. So we have talked about other conceptual matters, because we had raised, and in fact, we had raised the issue of, is there something we can do, moving off-site or even something on-site, and that was rejected out of hand by the Preservation Alliance. I mean, they said in situ or not at all. So, and it's fair to say, in situ is not our position. But we might, we've been thinking about and contemplating something, obviously we not only contemplated, but we've already put before you that we would do offsite. We would keep the, make an arrangement with a third party if they want to move it offsite. And then on-site, we've actually taken a look at that too. So.
No, I understand that, but I guess the answer to the question then is yes, that the library does not want to change the current design, correct?
Of its own building or the new building?
Of its own building.
No, we don't want to change the design of the new building that's being proposed. That's correct.
So if I understand the argument for that correctly, the issue is the logistics of the build in terms of keeping the old building in place and then building the new and then swapping over and moving into the new building, essentially a hot swap, as well as the costs associated with the redesign. Am I correct in my understanding of the reasons for that hesitation?
Oh, so I mean, if you mean to, I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood. Are you meaning like to redesign the new building to incorporate the 1913 and 36 buildings? Is that what you're driving?
Right. So
yeah.
What I understood from Ms. Oldham, maybe it was the last meeting or the previous meeting prior to that, the biggest driving factor in the current design, placement of the building relative to existing structure was, number one, the logistics of the build, and that you could build the new library building, keeping the old one in place and operational while the new one's being built, so that when the new one's ready, it's effectively a hot swap. You don't have to relocate or have temporary facilities or
right.
multiple moves. That's number one.
Right.
And number two, there would be a substantial cost or some cost for redesigning the building, the new library building, to incorporate the old historic building. So both of those items are really cost driven, correct?
Those items are cost driven, but the library also is looking to have the library green. So I mean so it's not just cost, it's also location driven. So
yeah, I get that part. But if there was a vehicle by which money could be raised to allow the differential of that cost to be absorbed by someone other than the library, would the library be open to a redesign?
I would actually have to ask Lisa the question directly, but I think because the library green is an important concept and we would be losing a significant portion of the library green, that may not be the entire answer. I mean, that even if we had the money that landed from somewhere else, that may not satisfy the library, because they're looking at programming both in the new building and outside, literally on their property. So
yeah,
I can't further answer if I'm allowed to speak.
Sure, yeah, fine with me.
Dan, I think you did have that all very right. There's a lot of logistical issues when you consider where the frontage of the 1913 building is on the site and where the bulk of the library would be built. While we're still inhabiting it during the construction period, there is a almost 40,000 square foot building in between the two. So bridging where that front piece of the original library is and wherever a new library would be does create a very challenging logistical problem for design because we would need to keep operating throughout, or we would need to be doing a very two-phased at least project, which would increase the cost considerably. But also, yes, there is a lot of cost already invested in a year's worth of design. So certainly that is a factor. And lastly, as Brian said, there is the idea of having the green was always an integral part of the program. But there are many elements to this, and we could certainly have Mark Herter speak if you wanted to ask some more questions about that.
No, I was just, I guess my query was more to the position of the openness of the library and the library board. If cost was not an issue, would you be receptive to a partial redesign? I mean, keeping a town green, that's also still possible even with a redesign, right? We don't need to get into it now, but there's many options there. It just seems, it seems that the overall planning and design measures here are being driven purely by the cost implications.
I don't think that's accurate. It is not about the cost. It would be, there have been many drivers for all of this. The green particularly, cost certainly. At this stage, we are very hopeful, yes, that the town will be a contributor. But for most of the design of this project, the assumption was that the library would fundraise for all of the money. So of course, cost is a consideration. In the last year, we have had conversations with town that lead us to be optimistic that town will be a partner, but that is not yet the case. And it was not the case during a lot of the planning and design work. So of course, cost is a consideration, but certainly not the only driver.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
So I'd like to make one comment, if I may. Mark Herter from Centerbrook. I explained this in our earlier presentations, but over the years, we've looked at 12 different options for this library, many of which tried to incorporate, move, or use the original 1913 building within it. In its current location, redesign of the existing building would be a major compromise in the program. There's no doubt about it. The layout of it and the ways in which that building would be incorporated would change the nature of the building considerably. And it wouldn't be just cost, it's program. And you would sacrifice the green in many ways. You'd either bifurcate it or you'd substantially reduce it. So there are big considerations when we talk about the green, the program, and the current location of that building. Many of the examples that we looked at over the years actually had to move the 1913 building in order to incorporate it in a way that could work programmatically or otherwise to preserve portions of the site. So it's not a small undertaking. It's a substantial redesign, but it's also something that we looked at in a considerable way, and it did not work.
Understood. I didn't mean to imply that it was a simple solution. It's definitely would be a very complicated redesign.
Got it. Yeah, no, I didn't think you were. I understand that. I just wanted to make that point.
Sure.
Thank you.
Understood.
Okay. Other commissioners? Mr. Cruz?
Question for Ms. Oldham, if I may. It's John Cruz speaking. Further to the point that Commissioner Radman mentioned, let's deal with the finances. Let's say someone walks up and says, here's $25 million. And want you to use this to renovate the 1936 and 1913 library in situ. You can use it for whatever reason, for whatever purpose the library wants. Take renovation and other money right out of that. And given the amount of money that's being donated, you don't have to worry about having to rent it out and have some cranky or deadbeat tenant to worry about, the parking issues and everything else you have with a tenant on your campus. it's all yours and it's all being funded. Now, that's what you get. The give up is the town green as you conceive it goes, because the library is sitting there, the old original library building. As I understand the library's position, Ms. Oldham, you'd say thanks, but no thanks. We really want the town green. Is that a fair statement, ma'am?
I think this is an incredibly difficult question for me to ask. I am one person out of many involved in this project. I think there would be a lot of things to unpick there, but my personal belief, and as the only librarian in the team who is thinking constantly about what it is to be a library serving a community for the next 100 years, I do believe that the green is totally integral and important to this project. I also believe that the community has shown a huge amount of support for the green. I think that would be a very challenging thing to have happen. I still wouldn't have a use for that building, so I don't know, how that would work. But I think it's a really it's not a question I can fairly answer without consultation of many others. It is not a project of just one person.
If I just, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Ms. Oldham, but what I'm hearing is that in the pantheon of what's important for the library, that the town green, as you define it, is pretty high up there in importance.
It is.
Fair statement?
It is. That is a fair statement.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Certainly.
Anybody else?
I have a question. This is Claire Tiscornia. I agree with Lisa Oldham, and I quite frankly, John, I don't think that was a fair question. You can't offer someone a fake $25 million check, at 9:30 at night, during this meeting. Like, that makes no sense. And it's not fair to put her on the spot like that. But just in her defense, I do think that the town green is going to be a major, major asset for our town. I mean, a green space of that size in the middle of our village, I think is wonderful, and I'm all for it.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
The point I was trying to make is, to suss out exactly how important the town green is, given other benefits that may come. And what I heard is that even with ample funding for the whole old library renovation reuse, the town green is very, very high as far as benefits, and that it's so high that it would even eclipse a very large donation for maintenance of the old library. So what I'm trying to determine is, relative importance of this to the applicant, and I got my answer.
I think they've been clear on it.
Okay, let's keep moving. Anybody else?
Yeah, John, I was hoping to ask a couple questions.
Okay, Chris Herring.
Yeah, so I think, one of the things that the library has raised a few times is that, they've sold a vision of this new library and this indoor-outdoor space and this integration to the town fabric to the donors, and they've raised 16 million. And it seems it's pretty consistent based on the feedback that we've seen in the letters, that there's a lot of worry that the library won't move ahead or be able to move ahead with that same sort of momentum if they're given this thing around their neck to maintain this building and this land. And so one of the concepts that was raised in the letter was this concept of inverse condemnation. And I was just curious if Brian could speak to that and just help us understand that point of view.
Certainly. Brian Smith again for the New Canaan Library. Inverse condemnation is simply, it's a term used when there is an imposition of an approval, so to speak, that that an applicant does not want or desire, that basically it over-regulates to such a degree that it serves as if it's a taking. of, where a typical normal taking is an eminent domain where the town simply says that we want your property, we have a public purpose for it, we're going to take it, and they allocate funds for it. In an inverse condemnation is simply there's a regulation put in place that forces an owner to do something that is beyond what's appropriate. And so a condition of approval, and so I tie it immediately to this condition that the Preservation Alliance has proposed, would be to say to the library as an applicant, you must keep your building in place. And if a third party can come up with a viable plan, in which I don't even know the definition of that, but a viable plan, then you must allow that third party to proceed. And if you don't have a use for it, the third party will do something. And that is so much of an overregulation that it's a virtual condemnation. And in fact, it almost turns into an actual condemnation because you're literally transferring the power or the use of the land to a third party by the way that particular condition is constructed. That's why I was commenting on that and on that way that particular proposed condition was worded.
Okay, thank you. So it's kind of analogous to someone telling you that you need to, do something to your own house that you own outright, and then, potentially devalue or prevent you from living in it, or prevent you from selling it. So that sort of catch-22.
It is it's a catch-22. I mean, and so that's why I want to be very clear that we object to that condition. And I didn't even say this, but I think that the condition not only serves that, it's actually somewhat vague. So I don't even know, even if you were to impose such a condition, I don't even know what a viable plan even means, because that's in the eyes of the beholder. Like what is it that we have to maintain it at a loss, at a great, at a profit, or what? So many issues there.
Okay, thanks, John.
Mr. Bash?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if this is possible, but if Miss Sullivan is still there and
I really don't want to go there.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
With all due respect, Mr. Bash, we get into a back and forth and
totally understood. I just wanted I was thinking to get multiple perspectives on that issue, but I totally understand. I'll move on to the next question I had for Mr. Smith.
Right.
So Mr. Smith, James Bash, if I didn't mention that before, the example that you gave in thinking about a taking makes perfect sense to me in the instance that I own a private property, and if the town of New Canaan decided through eminent domain to take my property without just compensation, that would be a violation of the law. It's less clear to me, and I certainly don't have a legal background, in an instance where a town contributes 70% of the ongoing operational funds of that public entity, or that because underground parking didn't work, that the town was willing to, at I think a $10,000 lease, give 76 parking spaces at the Center Street lot, or a $10 million grant, or 48 South Avenue, and granting that property to the library. So when you start to intermix the significant amount of contribution that makes our excellent library viable, that from a legal context does not mitigate whether or not a taking is a warranted claim. Is that correct?
I think that that's sort of an apples and oranges comparison, because the library is an independent legal entity. It's a New Canaan Library Incorporated. It's not a town agency. It's a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. The fact that the town issues grants, for operational purposes is something that is acknowledged and appreciated and that understood. However, could the library operate on its own? Yes, it's an independent organization. It would certainly, its services would diminish if it did not have that funding. But the fact that I mean, some private developers, as Mr. Krosky even mentioned, you know, a private developer can get historic tax credits. Does that mean that they have to abide by conditions that you know, of a third party coming in telling them, you know, what they can do? That's really not the same thing. So that's my point, is that the imposition of a condition is different than what the commission has, as you know, is the choice of, you don't have to approve our applications. I mean, that is your right to do, you know, but to impose a condition where we're now subject to a third party coming up with a viable plan is something that just is beyond the pale. I mean, that would be inappropriate, and we would suggest would violate the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution as a taking. I mean, that's where it comes to. So the fact that there is town funding to some degree really isn't the driving factor here. That doesn't really change the legal analysis, in my view, of this particular condition that's being proposed.
Something, so John Goodwin, something that I would like to add, commissioners, is once we go into deliberations, one of the town attorneys will attend our deliberations. So you will have the opportunity to get our town attorney's feedback on all of these issues. Anybody else questions for the applicant? Okay, I have some questions. Mr. Smith, I'm still caught up with this private park concept. In the overlay zone, the sentence is, the last sentence of the definitions is, a private park may be open for use by the general public. That sort of bothers me. Would a private park will be open for use by the general public satisfy? My point simply being is,
you change the word.
yes, I acknowledge that it's the library's property, but, you know, as we've all agreed, this is a public-private partnership. And, you know, for example, I'm sure we're aware of the beautiful park in Gramercy Park, and you go down to this beautiful park, it's a gem, and you get to this thing and there's a sign on the little gate there. They can't walk in unless you're, you know, unless you live within a block or whatever. So would that be acceptable?
I'm sorry, I think the word change was from may to will.
May to will.
May to will.
I just don't understand why, you know, we're talking about this beautiful green gem of a town, why the park is not available to the town.
Yeah, I think that, I don't think that that would be an issue that I would, you know, that the library would object to.
Okay, great, great. Next question, thank you. Next question is, can I assume that the town engineer's conditions and Mr. Galante's conditions, including 1 year after the CO, Lynn, correct me if I'm getting it wrong. I think it's right now in the MOU, but are we in agreement that we will place all of these conditions on the special permit? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, Brian Smith again. Yes, that would be where the conditions would have to be, in my view. They'd be on the special permit.
Right, and you're comfortable with all the conditions in terms of discussions between the town engineer and the consultant, Mr. Galante, with your respective experts. Do you agree?
Yes, I believe that I agree. You know, with Mr. Galante. I think with the town engineer, I think that they were. And I think Mr. Carney could address this if I get this wrong. They were having discussions, and I think they agree on the concepts. I think there's just details that have to be ironed out, but that's like a lot.
Yeah, and that'll be the condition, is the condition will be the effect of the details have to get ironed out, even though the application's closed.
Correct, yeah. And that's frequently done, yes. So that would be, so the answer is yes then to your question. So
okay, good. I just, you know, best to be crystal clear before we close this thing. So let's go back to something that we talked about earlier. So, and specifically, could there be, and I know this, you know, according to certain the preservationists, this does not meet the definition of preservation. But But in your letter, you write, even retaining some very minor portions on site. I would prefer the word minor had not been in your letter. But can I understand that if, we have Mr. Radman's position, which is in an ideal world, the 1913 building would be incorporated into the design of the building. Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but
Correct.
Correct, thank you. And then, of course, the preservationist view is the building stays in situ. And then, I think one of the key, what the library is saying is, well, we want to maintain the integrity of the town green, however that is defined. So my question is, is there the opportunity on a go forward basis to actively explore, something better than, paintings at the Historical Society? And, if you maybe talk to me about your letter and that provision in your letter.
Brian,
Yeah, I was just about to say that letter is really generated, and obviously I'm representing the library, so I think Lisa Ullman can address that.
Sure. No, whoever on the team Ms. Oldham, Mr. Herder as well. Whoever would like to address it, I'm all ears.
Okay. Thank you, John. It's Lisa Oldham here, Director of the library. As you know, and we spoke earlier about this, we did meet a number of times with the Preservation Alliance to try to find some common ground, including recently with Kathleen's mediation, which was terrific. All throughout this time, we've returned several times to the idea of a memorial of the building somehow retained on site. And we have developed that idea. In the recent mediation, when we heard so clearly that option was unacceptable, we put it to one side. But we have thoroughly explored that option. The creation of a memorial pavilion, we would see this as a reconstruction of the portico from the front of the original library building. It would be a small structure, approximately 20 feet by 10 feet, which would be comprised of the columns, the lintel, the pediment, the roof, floor, and a portion of the stone stairs of the portico. We would reposition this on the western edge of the green to the west of the curved path in the landscape, where it would then become a memorial to the original building and serve as a small pavilion. I think it would be a really pleasant place where members of the community could sit and read or view a performance on the green. And it would, of course, it would be accessible to everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Oldham. Okay, anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, I have one question on the may versus will on access to the town green as proposed. Yep. Would the change from may to will create a easement the town would have then over the green?
No, I think it's just the library saying that the green is available to the public. I don't think it's I mean, we can double happy to double check with Attorney Bloom whether it creates an easement. I mean, Lynn, do you have a view there?
I don't actually. I would have said the same thing. Let's talk to Attorney Bloom.
Okay, so we'll do that.
Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, commissioners, last licks. Anybody? We all good?
I know that, Mr. Chairman, I know that I think, first of all, I want to thank everybody for your very hard, long, dedicated work. But I think Lisa Ullman, as the face of the applicant, so to speak, would like to just say a few words if you're about to close this before, if there's no more questions. So
absolutely, please do.
I just want to say thank you again.
You're welcome.
On behalf. So Lisa.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, John. On behalf of the library, its governing board, the
I don't think so.
and especially,
Okay.
Just can everybody mute themselves, please? I'm sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
That's okay. On behalf of the governing board, the staff, and especially all of those who benefit from and enjoy the services of the library, I wish to thank you, the commissioners, for your service to the community. New Canaan's engine is powered by volunteer energy. And like you, our trustees, present and past, are volunteers from our community whose service stems from their love for New Canaan. Like you, they give their talent, their time, and their care to serving the community, making the challenging decisions to ensure best outcomes. It is therefore that we understand and we really, really appreciate the dedication, time, and thoughtfulness that each of you brings to your role on this commission, and we're grateful for what you do. We knew that this process would take at least 3 to 4 sessions, and we've worked as hard as we can to respond swiftly to the questions from specialists and engineers between the meetings. We know this process is complex and nuanced, and that you have a tremendous amount of information to contemplate as you make your decisions. And while we are eager after all these years to turn the page and start the next chapter, we also understand and fully support the careful, methodical processes of this commission. The project has inspired a passionate response from the community, and we have witnessed high levels of civic engagement. It's really affirming to know how much the people of New Canaan care about the library. We've read the hundreds of letters that have been sent to this body and elsewhere, and we celebrate the enthusiastic participation of all who have engaged. It's maybe a sign of our times that occasionally zealous supporters of every point of view, perhaps those who have not fully understood the process, as you said at the beginning, Chairman Goodman, maybe have gone a little too far in some of the correspondence. As one of the people who has been both maligned and also celebrated by letter writers that I haven't even met, I understand that this public process brings challenges along with the rewards. As we close this hearing, I want to bring us back to the central point and talk about why we are all here, our library. The great American thought leader on libraries, David Lenks, writes extensively on the role of the library in the community. His oft-quoted maxim is that great libraries build communities. For over 200 years, New Canaan has had a library which has both nourished and been nourished by the citizenry. It is of the people and for the people. It is a community anchor at the literal and figurative heart of town. The library is for every person in the community, from newborn to centenarian. It is the one universally accessible place for lifelong learning and cultural appreciation. The library supports our democracy and facilitates the creation of new knowledge through the collections, programs, and highly qualified staff, so that individuals can learn, synthesize, and importantly, contribute. New Canaan Library values commitment, service, and excellence, as well as intellectual freedom, sustainability, diversity, and inclusion. These values and our mission strengthen our community daily as people engage in conversation, discussion, and debate around ideas and ideals which are presented in our programs. We partner with others to leverage the expertise of the many creative and insightful people who call New Canaan home. We support all of our families with enriching, professionally developed curricula of literacy and learning for New Canaan youth. The project we have brought before you will provide a community space where all of this can happen for future generations of New Canaanites. The new facility in the green will be a leader in placemaking, strengthening the connections of individuals to their community and to the town as a place through the platform for learning that is the library. As you know, we have an uncommon library funding structure. Though we are an independent nonprofit, which raises significant funds from local families to provide a library service, the town of New Canaan, through longstanding agreement, exchanges an annual grant for a good level of library service for all the citizens. To build the new facility that supports an excellent level of library services for the future, the library had previously raised millions of dollars to buy multiple adjacent properties and to initiate the exploratory work that ultimately led to this plan. And for this plan specifically, we've raised an additional $16 million to date and will continue raising at least $12 million more to complete the project. And we hope, in the spirit of our longstanding arrangement, the town will also contribute. It seems that almost everyone in town supports the beautiful and functional new library that New Canaan deserves, along with, and most support the green. We wish you well in your deliberations. We thank you so very much for your time and your dedication to New Canaan. And the library respectfully requests that the commission approves our application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Oldham, and thank you for all of the work that you and the library have done. And also thank you for all the work that everyone else has done that's contributed to this application. One thing I did want to note was I understand that there was an overwhelming flow of letters today. Any letters received by midnight tonight, even if you have not seen them posted, will become part of the public record. So I understand there was some concern there. So commissioners will circulate some dates for a special meeting. As I said earlier, one of the either Attorney Bloom or Attorney Gelderman, perhaps both, will attend the meeting with us. You know the decisions we have to make. We have to make a decision on amending the regulations. That's pages 190 to 191. It's the POCD. It's the totality of regulations. It's health, safety, and property values. Also changing the zoning boundary, which is similar decision criteria to take into account. The site plan, page 181, you're all very familiar with site plan criteria. And then, of course, the special permit criteria on pages 185 to 187. And again, thank you to everybody, and this hearing's closed. Okay, commissioners, let's make a decision on 50 Adams. Mr. Bash is seated for Ms. Tiscornia. Do I have a motion for approval or denial?
I'll be glad to move that, and I'll move it for approval. The basis for that is that it's a very minor alteration to a well-designed site plan with no neighbor objections.
Great. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion of the motion? Everybody comfortable? Okay. I call the question. John Goodwin, I vote yes. Mr. Kriz?
Yes.
Ms. Nielsen?
Yes.
Mr. Radman?
Yes.
Turner? Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Mr. Ward?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Cassavant?
Yes.
Mr. Bash?
Yes.
Okay, passes unanimously. I don't see any need to discuss the library tonight unless anybody wants to give some thoughts. Are we all good taking the time to think about things, right? We're good? Okay, super.
Yeah.
Okay, item number 7, 365 Luke's Wood Road. I am recused. I turn the chairmanship over to Mr. Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I guess we have everyone that we need seated. Is that correct, Lynn?
Yes, I believe, yes, both of our alternates were seated. So you should have.
I wasn't seated.
Oh,
but I don't need to be, because I think if Claire doesn't have to recuse herself from this one, right?
Oh.
So
That's right.
Mr. Bosch could continue.
wait, no, I think you were seated, weren't you?
Yeah.
No,
I think so.
James was.
No, I don't believe so. I'm happy to, but I think.
Oh, I see. I sorry, from the last meeting. Yes, I was
Yeah,
seated from the last meeting. Yep.
Yeah, the seating stays. It's you were seated, so that's it. The seating is set. So you're seated for this matter.
I see. I apologize.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, I think now as all the commission members realize that we received this afternoon a draft of potential resolutions, findings, and conditions. Now, I don't know if you have all had a chance to read it. Perhaps not. But I will point out just a couple of things before I sort of open the discussion. The draft is, I think, well done. It has been able to sort of get over the problem of having successive and multiple special permits with additional and change conditions making it potentially very difficult for anyone to really know exactly what is applicable, what is the totality of the special condition, all the pieces. This draft makes it clear, and it says as one of the findings that this special condition, meaning the one that's before us, only addresses conditions 19, 49, and 51 of the September 26, 2017 special permit resolution. So the 2017 resolution remains in effect, only modified with respect to the three conditions just mentioned. I think that will make it easier if this is the way we go. It'll make it easier for people down the road to know exactly what the special condition application is. The draft before you also incorporates in the one special condition the three issues that were in the application: the Pudding Hill, the for-profit access, and the reporting, to use those terms rather broadly. But the document before you addresses all three of those. And it would be my understanding that if we should agree to go to a vote, that it would be basically one vote. It would be on this document, which would then take care of all three issues that were raised by the applicant. Is that a fair comment, Lynn? Is that the way you would read this?
Yes, yes, that is correct. I would just add one thing. I did send this draft resolution to town council to review, and if you guys decide to vote on it tonight, the only caveat would be that the town council would just like to wordsmith a few of the conditions further. But the gist of everything that's in here would remain.
This is Krista Nielsen. I apologize for interrupting. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right thing because it feels like mine's not complete. Is it 6 pages?
Yeah. Yes, it is, Krista.
So these 19 conditions pertain then only to conditions 19, 49, and 51 in the original special permit. Like, we're not repeating the entire special permit application and just making changes to those 3 conditions. We're writing
Correct.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the way this was drafted, that, you know, as I say, that it addresses only those 3 conditions. Therefore, all other conditions, what was it, 100 conditions, I think, in the 2017 special permit remain, unless they've been modified by this one specifically.
So Lynn, I have a question for you if I can. I read this letter and I also compared it to the notes of our prior meeting. I get concerned when I hear the town council may want to wordsmith that. What does that mean?
Like the grammar, not the,
Okay, fine.
like the grammar is, he just wants to fine tune the grammar of some of the.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I would prefer not to take the time at this time at night to go through and have us jointly read every item in this 6-page document. I think that the resolution portion, which is on the first page, is self-explanatory. It just sort of recites a bit of the history of what has gone on. The findings, I think you will see, pretty much tend to parrot, well, not word for word, but retain the concepts contained in the 2017 special permit. Specifically, it states, for example, in finding number 11, it says for-profit entities to generate revenue are not appropriate for this property and are not permitted. Well, that's basically the words right out of the 2017. So that concept is being retained in the findings. There's not a new finding reversing the 2017. With respect to parking, finding number 12 addresses and restates that the original finding had 226 spaces. And it points out parking is a key factor in managing the level of activity at the site. It therefore, you will see, retains that max number of parking spaces. It then goes on and it does address Pudding Hill, which originally the finding pretty much limited to a residential house. But it now opens that up and says it can be used as part of the totality of the Grace Farm site for administrative purposes as well.
Mr. Ward, I'm sorry to interrupt again. Which number is that under the findings? Because I still don't think I'm looking at the right thing.
On that one, now let's see, did I highlight that one? 13, the last couple of lines, it talks about,
okay,
it finds the use of the building as an operations center for security and other administrative operations.
Mr. Ward, that probably, that needs to be deleted because that's the wrong, I pulled up the wrong condition, the wrong finding. It's the other, there's another one.
Well, it is sort of finding that Pudding Hill can be used for administrative operations. Is that?
No, this one's for the, this is the main entrance building from the original application. So I apologize. I can correct that.
Yeah, because I don't see anything in mine that refers to what they can use Pudding Hill for, which is why I'm confused about what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I apologize. That number 13 should have been deleted before you got it. So I apologize.
Okay. All right. But then Krista does raise a valid point. The findings, are they silent on?
Yeah, I meant to, I apologize that I didn't edit that correctly, but it would be reflective of what condition number 12 was, where it edited and said that the Pudding Hill Road lot and the buildings have been incorporated into the special permit and is authorized for the uses of that it could be used for 3 through 7, which would be the uses of a church, which is what they want to put there, which is currently now in the East Barn.
Okay, so you're looking at, all right, I see where you are. You're looking at the conditions.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I inadvertently forgot to carry over a finding for that, and I apologize. Thank you for catching that, Ms. Nielsen.
Okay, but with respect to Pudding Hill, I think that perhaps the important issue, which we did discuss at the last meeting, and I think we had pretty much call it a consensus, is that the driveway to 82 Pudding Hill shall only be used by Grace Farm staff and employees. All visitors shall continue to park in the main parking area. So church people coming to the Pudding Hill facility to meet with church staff for whatever purpose would not be parking at Pudding Hill. They park in the main parking and either walk or use golf cart or what other means might be available. Is that a fair statement?
We discussed it last time, or the applicant wanted to put parking there so that parishioners could drive in at the Pudding Hill gate, park right by the Pudding Hill house, go in and do their whatever they're going to do there with members of the church staff, and then drive out through that as well.
Correct.
That planned parking lot that they applied for would not occur, and you use the main parking lot as they do now, and they would need to transport themselves one way or another from that lot to the Puddin Hill house if the church and Grace Farms Foundation choose to use that as in effect, a parish house. That's what we're going for here then. Is that a fair summary of what we're trying to achieve here?
Yeah, last time, what John was saying, like if they were going to add those extra parking spots at Puddin Hill, they'd get taken away from the main
Right.
parking area in Grace Farms.
That's
So
right.
the total site would have a max of
226.
226. Yes.
Correct.
Oh, sorry.
What we're saying here is that those spots that they wanted to create at the Puddin Hill house are not going to happen. And the parking spots they have that have been authorized sort of stay where they are. So there's no change in aggregate number of spots available on the property.
I thought it was the opposite. I thought it was that we were going to allow them spots at Pudding Hill, given that the net number of spots on the site as a whole, the 226 number would remain the same, meaning they would have to take spots away in the rear so that the number didn't change.
Yeah.
That's what was discussed, correct, Mr. Radman, but that's not what it says here.
Yep, that's right.
There was also the issue with that. If there are spots there, it also indicates that the entrance of Puddin Hill, which is now essentially padlocked. And so a service person will drive up in a service truck, take a key out, open the gate up, drive in and relock the gate to do whatever that person needs to do there. To the extent parishioners will be showing up there becomes an issue of how do they enter the property at the Puddin Hill lot, and then security issues at that entrance to maintain adequate site security, which we discussed last time.
Yeah, I think what we were looking for after the last meeting was a little more clarity from Grace Farms on that, because obviously they're going to want to keep that entrance secure. And it seems like a pretty straightforward security protocol. Right now, you enter the gate, there's a manned gatehouse at the main entrance, which is fine. After hours, there's card key access if necessary. So that kind of card key access, meaning scan card, could be provided at a gate to the Puddin Hill residents as well, so that during the day, only Grace Farms staff would have card key access, and anyone entering as a visitor could just be buzzed in. No different than a typical residential entry gate. But we needed confirmation from Grace Farms that was indeed the logistics and the strategy for securing that gate.
That certainly could be the case, but that would essentially be what the situation is now, which is it's staff only, and staff includes Grace Church. It would not mean parishioners could enter through that gate.
Unless there was a speaker and a push button where you could be buzzed in.
But that's a whole, and then if a parishioner is driving in there, the parishioner needs a parking space to put the car, which they don't have. So they sort of go together.
Well, I think the reality is that if Pudding Hill is going to be used by Grace Farm staff and employees, I think it was like 15 staff people that presently are located in, the West Barn, will be in Pudding Hill. They presumably are going to have some additional parking spaces at Pudding Hill. They'll have to remove parking spaces elsewhere, but I think that perhaps they're going to need some additional parking spaces just to accommodate what they are, those people that are permitted to operate out of Pudding Hill. On the security, the condition 16 does say Grace will install a security system at the Pudding Hill driveway that will allow for recognition of visitors to the facility. The system will be connected to the existing security system.
Again, my interpretation of that, Mr. Ward, is that it indicates parishioners or non-employees of the Grace Farms community are going to be entering and exiting at the Puddin Hill, and there's a place for them to park. There's no place for them to park. There's no point in them driving in because there's no place to put the car. So the security system and the parking really go hand in hand. So if the gate is going to be maintained, which it is now, and it's used strictly for by service and security people who have it chained and padlocked, and they just chain it and unchain it whenever they go in and out, which seems to work fine. And it does provide security. You don't really need the security system because they already have one. It's the padlock and chain.
But it's more people. There'll be more employees now that will be located in Pudding Hill, as I understand it. It's the group that are presently in West Barn.
Well, it's how do they get there? You know, do they get there entering through the gate on Puddin Hill Road, which means they need a place to park, or they park
right?
Parking is now, and they walk or take a cart over.
I would think that
can go together.
I would think the employees would expect to perhaps park at Pudding Hill, therefore need parking and need an appropriate security gate. Whereas visitors, condition 13 says all visitors shall continue to park in the main parking area.
Well, if you do have that, they need a better security system, I would think, at the Puddin Hill gate. And they would need to create parking, which means some of the parking spots that now exist, was the 228 total on site?
226.
220, the number.
Yeah.
They either put cones up there and say no parking here ever, or they take a jackhammer and tear up the asphalt and turn it into grass. Those are essentially the two choices if we're going to eliminate those parking spots. Unless I'm missing something.
Yes, Mr. Chris, you're correct. If you're referencing the fact that they already have an existing driveway there and there are parking spaces there. And if I recall correctly, that's used by their facilities department, their maintenance department.
Well, the maintenance department doesn't need 15 parking spaces for these employees of the church who are going to be in this building. You know, they drive a truck in, they do whatever they do, maybe 2 trucks, but it's not 15 trucks, I think.
I'm assuming, I may be wrong, but I'm assuming that if they're moving 15 employees to Pudding Hill from elsewhere on the site, they're going to need additional parking at Pudding Hill for those employees, and only for the employees, not for visitors.
So the visitors walk and the employees drive. One of the challenges could be, I mean, we get lots of snow and bad weather here, so you have an elderly parishioner shows up and is in need of some counseling, would drive into the main lot and then need to be transported, assuming this person can't walk there, which is certainly possible, would need to be transported in some manner to Puddin Hill. So either they get into a truck and exit the property and then re-enter the property, or they're in a golf cart or some other vehicle to get there, and there's no roadway there, so it's a bit off-road.
So what solution are you suggesting?
Well, I guess we got, as I see it, there are 2 choices. One, no extra parking at Puddin Hill, and they have to, you know, hump it over the grass to get there, which is awkward, particularly with parishioners who, again, may not be that ambulatory. Could be elderly, or could be in a wheelchair or something that makes it difficult to get there. And that would seem to be an imposition that I would have difficulty with. The other choice is that you would have a higher end security system at the entrance, at the current gate on Puddin Hill, which means you got a box, you press the button, someone buzzes you in from Puddin Hill. Also as a place you can swipe your card key if you're if you're employee or security or someone else, you do that. So you get logged in that way. And if you push the button and the gate opens, because it's being opened by someone from inside the building. You would drive in, park. So we need to create parking at Puddin Hill, some adequate number of spots. And then you would walk into the house and do whatever it is you're going to do there, and then drive out again. That would entail creating the parking, which they discussed. They had a berm there, and they would have put some plantings in there and a wall and so forth. And then, because of the whatever number of spots would be created at Puddin Hill, a similar number would be eliminated somewhere else on property in order to maintain the absolute limit on parking, which we have in the current conditions. That's my understanding.
Remind me, Lynn, was there a stated purpose for the building usage, including counseling? I mean, because my recollection of this was that they wanted to move administrative people over there, employees, perhaps finance, accounting, marketing, God knows. And I think we're trying to solve, John, for an issue that should be their problem, not ours. I mean,
Correct.
Mr. Cassavant, to answer your question, their application contemplated moving the entire Grace Church staff and the church function from the East Barn over to this house at Pudding Hill Road. And so it would essentially become it's akin to a parishioner's house in some ways.
It's a parish house, I agree. That's how I read it.
Yes.
Yeah, they want them out of the barn, and they want them here.
I mean,
Mr. Ward, it's Kent Turner. I'm confused. We seem to be designing the conditions for this approval. I'm confused. I mean, they have proposed something. Are we countering the conditions? I'm not following this. Why are we trying to get down to how many parking spaces should be at Puddin Hill versus in the regular parking lot?
Well, I think we all agree to maintain the maximum of 226.
Correct.
I suppose we could leave it up to Grace Farms as to where they want those 226 parking spaces to be located. If they put more at Pudding Hill, then they have to reduce elsewhere.
Correct.
But I think I agree with you, Ken. We are not trying to design and dictate, you must have 13 or you must have 26 parking spaces at Pudding Hill.
So this is Krista Nielsen. What if we did this? What if on condition number 12 that says, well, 82 Pudding Hill Road has been incorporated into the special permit and authorized for the uses set forth in findings 3-7 inclusive, and then just add a statement at the end of that saying like, there shall be no net change in overall parking on site. Delete number 13, because I don't think that adds anything. That's where we're over designing ourselves. And then to Mr. Chris's point, I don't know if number 16 is adequate about the security. Does that work as a potential solution?
Yes.
I think that it does. That's okay with me.
If memory serves, they presented a plan for what their Puddin Hill parking lot should look like. And they had a berm that was going to be installed for site shielding, as well as planting issues regarding that. And they were going to put in some retaining walls as part of it. We had discussion about how you're going to plow and get the snow out of the area and so forth. But they presented a plan for parking there. Now we can reject it or approve it or modify it, but they came up with a plan. They had a map and everything. So they did present something. What we want to do with it, again, is our decision, but that's what they came up with. Yeah, there it is. You can see the berm on the right, and there's the entryway, the entry road. there's also I guess a shed they have there for storage and so forth that I guess it's an existing condition that they're gonna leave there for maintenance, and I don't know what all they got in it, but.
Sure, but I mean, building on that, John, I mean, if we were to come back with them with these conditions, wouldn't they have to come back to us with a redesign as to, you know, rather than critique the submittal here, maybe come back with a top line guidance, and then they'd come back with a recommended reconfiguration?
One of the issues we may run into is, let's assume for illustrative purposes that we approve more or less the parking situation as they presented to us in their application for Puddin Hill. Now that would include the elimination of other spaces. Now, we can either leave it up to them which spaces go, but we may want to choose which spaces go and how they go. So going can mean either you put cones up there or something that's going to block those spaces, put a dumpster there, I don't know what, so they can't be used for parking cars, or you simply eliminate them by getting jackhammers out and just tearing it up. Those are only two ways I can think of limiting parking spaces. One's a temporary and one's a more permanent solution.
I mean, at the end of the day, we're only concerned about the maximum amount that is currently approved for parking. If they want to provide the parking at Putin Hill as they're showing in this drawing, that's fine. Yes, they have to eliminate parking and let them come back and tell us how they want to do it. Do they want to put bollards up? Do they want to jackhammer it? Let them tell us how they're going to marshal or control those parking spots so that they're not used.
I'm okay with that.
So just bear in mind that the matter is closed, so they have no opportunity to come back to you.
No, but I was going to say, maybe do we add on to the condition where we say there's no net change in parking, that they need to present to the town planner how they're going to make this work given that condition? Like, and let you be the one that sees what their plan is.
Makes sense.
How many spots are they asking for? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think it's about 20 spots as I count.
Yeah.
Net addition. 10 on each side. I don't see any other existing spots unless they're cannibalizing some.
Well, there's there's an existing driveway with existing space for cars. It's not laid out with striped parking, but there is an existing driveway with parking available for multiple cars. It was a residence.
Yeah.
Well, it wouldn't allow parking there. We just say no parking. That's sort of like an area for a drop off or something like that, or deliveries. But you'd have to park in one of the 20 designated spots.
Condition 10 does say that the property will be closed to visitation by the general public whenever the actual parking occupancy on the site reaches the maximum available parking spaces, 226. That seems to contemplate that the security gate or gates, if there's a new gate at Pudding Hill, count the number of cars that are coming in. Once they hit 226, something happens.
I would agree with that, Mr. Ward, is that as I would contemplate security, is that they would know any Grace Church or Grace Farm employee who enters there and with a vehicle, because, you know, you'd be swiping some sort of pre-authorized security card at a box to get the gate open. So you go in and then when you leave, that's counted as well as any parishioners or others who may be there for counseling or other reasons. The 226, as I understand, would not count for, let's say, a service truck for Grace Farms that's moving from one part of the property to another. It would be a visitor of some sort.
Well, I assume there has to be some control at the security gates. Because even if you had exactly 226 parking spaces, that doesn't mean that other cars wouldn't or couldn't come in and, double park over on the side, or sort of pull off onto the grass. I mean, there seems to me there has to be, or presumably is, some control on the number of vehicles that enter the site. Do you have any thoughts, Lynn, on how it's working now? Are they observing the 226 spaces and control the number of cars that come in?
They do, because everyone enters through the main gate right now. And it's part of their reporting is that they report the number of cars going in and out per hour. So they account for it. I mean, the last year plus, they've been closed due to the pandemic. So the number on site is usually lower than 50 and probably closer to 25 or less regularly. But in previous years, it depends on the season. It depends on the activities that are going on the site and what day it is, depending on when they see increases and decreases in vehicular traffic on the site.
Well, I think maybe we go along the lines that Kent expressed, and max 226. They decide where they want to have those 226 parking spaces.
And you want them to come, you want them to submit a plan to the town planner that shows where that parking is going to occur?
That sounds reasonable.
Yes, for our final approval.
So at the end of the day, you want me to go back and fine tune these conditions for the resolution and bring it back to you next month?
Why would we need to wait to do that? I mean, that goes into the category of just clarifying the legal language, right? And just saying there's a maximum of 226, whatever distribution of spaces you conclude must comply with planning requirements.
I would love to be able to finalize this tonight. So I like Art's idea.
I agree.
Agreed.
Okay, are there any other comments? I think that on the reporting, I think, Lynn, what you have written is, I don't know, fine with me as just one person.
Again, sorry, because I haven't read this in detail, but where does it, because weren't we changing the reporting period to, was it quarterly?
Quarterly.
Where does it say that? I mean, I see number 19 says by the 15th of each month following the end of a reporting period. But where does it disclose what the reporting period length is?
In A for the next quarter, I can clarify it further and divide it out, explain. I think I did actually.
Yeah, I thought I read that someplace.
In B, I referenced quarter being for the calendar year, but I can spell it out in more detail if you'd like, that the first quarter is,
It's 19A.
Right. I mean, I would just clarify before you get to A that the reports are due quarterly. And then here's what you have to do by the 15th of the month.
So essentially by following the end of a quarterly reporting period, could that just solve the problem?
Well, that's what it says now. Like you're not, until you get to A, you're kind of having to extrapolate how long a reporting period is. Like I just would say a sentence that says reports are due quarterly by the 15th of each month following the end of a reporting period. Here's what you have to submit. Because didn't we used to have the reports be like monthly? So I mean, I just want it to be clear
Monthly.
that we're going from monthly to quarterly.
Exactly.
Okay. That's fine.
Just say calendar quarter. I think that's pretty well understood,
Mhm.
which means April 15, July 15, et cetera. So,
Okay, I think that we agree to the concept, and Lynn, if you could just perhaps clarify that a little.
Okay.
Well, if there are no further comments,
are
I'm
we in
prepared.
agreement on security issues for the gate on Puddin Hill?
Well, it says Grace will install a security system at Pudding Hill driveway that will allow for recognition of visitors to the facility. That's number 16. Do you want greater expression as to what that should entail?
Recognition and logging, so it need to be logged just in substantially the same fashion as at the main gate. I don't see a reason for a human there, but they can do it electronically with cameras and, you know, security cards and logs inside the building for visitors who are coming and going, because they need to keep track of the cars and who's on site, just like they do right now if you come in the main gate. So if you're a parishioner coming in the main gate, you get logged. You're just coming in another door, you get logged.
It says the system will be connected to the existing security system. Would that contemplate joint logging? Maybe they're going to have to develop a more detailed explanation that they submit to the town planner.
Yeah, I mean, it should be not only connected to the existing gate, but it should be the same system that has the capacity to monitor and to understand who's coming and going and allowing access. Equal system.
How about this? The gate at Pudding Hill will have a security system that is substantively equivalent to the security system at the main gate.
Yes.
And if they can do that electronically as opposed to having a human there, which they have it now, I'm okay with that. But I think there was concern, especially among neighbors, of having, you know, leaky security. That's a very hot button issue with them.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want visitors coming to Pudding Hill to park and then walk down to the rest of the site and have really no interest in going into the parish house.
There's always a possibility of that after they deal with whatever they're dealing with in the parish house, but
well, okay.
It's going to be few and far between, and they're going to be logged in any case, just as they would at the main gate. So more
Okay,
of a distinction than a difference.
Did you get some of John's suggestion there?
Yes, but could you just repeat and clarify that, please, Mr. Chris?
How about the security system at the Pudding Hill gate should be substantially equivalent to the security system at the main gate.
Okay. And essentially, it doesn't matter whether they do that with a computer system or a person, if I recall what you said.
It's okay with me. I don't know what other commissioners may think on this, but.
Agree.
That sounds okay.
Yeah, no, that language is excellent. Who want the same stuff they got elsewhere. Let them figure out how to do it.
Correct.
And the one thing I realized when I pulled up the visual a few moments ago is there's no condition. I didn't complete the condition of whether or not we were going to require them to extend the berm. Did the commission have a view?
We
Send the,
we spoke about that, and we said that the berm or other landscaping should screen any kind of view from the road or from adjacent properties for their maintenance facility and the parking lot.
that, just so everyone, I mean, I'm sure you guys have all driven by it, but at that entrance and as you go east to west on Puddin Hill, you look down that driveway, given the nature of the topography, you're never going to be able to see that parking lot. There's a bit of a hump of a hill there as that driveway goes in, and where they're positioning the parking lot is on the downslope beyond that hump. You know, we can tell them to put more landscaping in, but I don't think it's going to have much effect.
Lynn, could you bring up the schematic again? It might be helpful. You can see it about the 2 o'clock on an angle, upper left to lower right. That's where the berm is, or planned. And the idea is that, as I remember it, this is going to provide some shielding from the upper right of the 2 o'clock version, if you're in that part of the property, down to the lot. So it shields the lot from the rest of the property at that location. And the berm was going to be whatever length it is, and you know, I think about 2-3 feet high, and planted with native plants to be determined.
Okay.
Because I remember having a discussion with O'Hanlon on this at the meeting when he was there. And I remember he agreed to that, said it was fine.
Yeah, recollection on that was he said, we'll put in whatever planting is necessary.
Yeah. I mentioned native plants because that's one of my personal hot buttons, and he said, okay. So, but they suggested the berm. We didn't tell them. They volunteered that one. So,
yeah, I think it should be approved as drawn without having substantial conditions on it. I've driven by there a number of times over the last few weeks, and it's solid evergreens all the way along Puddin Hill, and 365 a year, you're not going to see into that area.
Well, they volunteered a berm with plants on it. So I say we take it.
Yeah, we take it. That's fine.
You know, Dan, what about from the east or from the southeast? Is it possible that the properties, adjacent properties, can see the back of the maintenance facility? I'm not sure.
That's a good point. That I don't know.
I mean, I think the berm does a great job, from Putin Hill, but I'm concerned about the other neighbors, on the other side of the property that.
Sure. Yeah.
Look down on it.
That I don't know. I can't answer that.
From this drawing, they have the, it's on the west side. You can see the outline of essentially the wall they're going to put in, because it's going to be somewhat dug into a hill.
Mm-hmm.
Going to be a retaining wall on the west side, and it's a little bit on the north and a little bit on the south.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the wall. So it's a bit under grade in effect, as they try to flatten that area out, because you can see the lines for the topography where they're going to have to flatten that out in order to put the flat parking lot in, and then it'll be putting some retaining walls. So there's going to be some natural shielding because you're simply sort of below grade a bit. And I think they would have put some plantings around it too.
Fair enough.
That was my recollection anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we have enough clarity and consensus among us, perhaps we are ready to consider a motion if someone wishes to proceed.
Dick, I agree, but I just wanted to, maybe I missed this earlier. Did we agree on the non, no acceptance of the commercial use for the rentals? I just didn't hear us cover that.
Yes, I think it's pretty clear on that the finding is, no for-profit activity.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And that just stayed as is, right, Mr. Ward? Like the
Pardon?
wording for that stayed as it already was.
Yes.
Like, you made no changes.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wasn't clear on. I just saw that. I wasn't sure if there was an additional write-up on that, but thank you.
Well, does anyone wish to move?
Yes, I move approval of the conditions set forth by the town planner with the minor revisions that we've spoken about tonight. I feel like, given the history of the conditions that we've been dealing with Grace Farms, this is a pretty fair and accurate representation of our relationship with them. We don't want for-profit organizations going there. We want to keep the parking as it is. And we want to encourage quarterly reporting since it'll be easier for staff.
Second, I would add
Just-
that we want to maintain a secure site.
Just to be clear on the conditions, we're keeping the condition of not changing the use classification. Let me go for the events, for public events. Is that correct?
What I thought.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think we're changing anything except those three things.
No, understood. I just wanted to be clear.
Okay.
Mr. Radman, when you refer to use classification, are you referring to just the fact that they can't have any events there that are for-profit driven, or are you?
Correct. Correct.
Then in the findings, that carried over the findings from the actual special permit from September 26th of 2017 to reflect the same finding.
Okay.
Finding number 11. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Number 11, correct.
Okay, well, I think we're ready call to question. Dick Ward votes yes. John Chris,
Yes.
Dan Redmond,
Yes.
Claire Tiscornia,
Yes.
Ken Turner,
Yes.
Phil Williams.
You're on
You're
mute.
Phil. You're still on mute.
Yes, sorry about that.
Thank you, Phil. Chris Nielsen,
Yes.
Krista, Arthur Casvan,
Yes.
Chris Herring,
Yes.
James Bash.
Nope, he's not seated.
Oh, you're not seated. I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry, James.
No worries.
Well, then it's unanimous. And these resolutions have been adopted, subject to the changes we have discussed and a final tweaking by the outside counsel. Okay, that takes care of my assignment, Mr. Chairman.
Well
How did
done,
you-
Mr. Ward.
How did he do?
Okay, item number 8, planning subcommittee update. Ms. Nielsen.
We are still working on some things. Lynn might be able to give a better update than I can, but I know she received some comments from Mr. Childler on the draft language we have. Maybe we will have a subcommittee meeting before the special meeting. Is that what we said, Lynn? You're on mute too, Lynn.
Thanks for noting that. But yes, that is what we said, that if we contemplate a special meeting, that we would probably have a subcommittee meeting before that, and we could have the document ready.
Okay,
That's it.
good. Okay. Item number 9, administrative actions or other matters may probably come before the commission. Before we jump into that, I did notice something, which is that certain commissioners are using their personal emails. I strongly recommend, because people will make your life miserable, to use a town email. Seriously.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't have access to town emails until a few years ago, and I'll repeat what I said. Anyhow,
Who creates them? Who do we have to?
Lynn, can you handle that for everybody?
Yeah, so we could send out a group email, and anyone who doesn't have one already can get one. That's not a problem.
Okay. Okay, great. 377 North Wilton Road, St. Luke's School requests approval to have summer camp. You all see the items there. Lynn, any comments? Looks pretty straightforward.
You are correct. It's pretty straightforward. We outlined everything. I just need a vote.
Okay. I have a motion to approve or deny. John, to approve.
I move we approve.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I
I'll
second.
second it.
Okay.
Who did-
I saw Claire. Okay. John Goodwin, I vote yes. John Chris,
Yes.
Krista Nielsen,
Yes.
Dan Radman,
Yes.
Claire Tiscornia,
Yes.
Ken Turner,
Yes.
Dick Ward,
Yes.
Bill Williams,
Yes.
Arthur Cassavant.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, minutes, April 15, special meeting, April 17, site visit, April 26, regular meeting. Anybody have any items for those three?
Mr. Chairman, just a correction, it's April 27th. We reposted the agenda to reflect the change yesterday morning. So it's April 27th is the date of the last meeting.
Okay, got it. Okay, everybody good? Okay, let's be efficient. I'll call the question to approve all three meetings. If you did not attend any of the three meetings, do not vote. John Goodwin, I vote yes. John Chris,
Yes.
Krista Nielsen,
Yes.
Dan Radman,
Yes.
Claire Tiscornia,
Yes.
Ken Turner,
Yes.
Dick Ward,
Yes.
Bill Williams.
I did not attend the site visit, so I'll vote yes for the other two.
Art Cassavant.
Same
Art,
as
you
well.
didn't do the site visit either.
That's correct. Same as
Okay.
well.
Chris or James, did either of you guys do all of these meetings?
I did.
Yeah.
Chris, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, you're both seated. So Chris Herring,
Yes.
James Bash.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, good night. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, John,
Yeah.
John, I would just like to give a pat on the back to Lynn because the length of that planner's memo, plus all these resolutions and conditions, I mean, she's been writing books.
Yeah.
So good
Sure.
job.
Well done, Lynn.
Thank you.
And John,
Good night, everybody.
yeah, and John,
Yeah,
John,
Ken?
can I just make one comment?
Yeah.
Congratulations to you and Lynn and everybody that participated with your time and effort to overturn or to make the voice known about how we as a town are planning for wise and good community planning. And luckily, the legislation was overturned. And thank you for your efforts.
Oh, thank you. And same for Lynn. I really appreciate that. Okay, guys, have a great night. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.